Rejected Boy of the Cursed Alpha Prince. Omegaverse Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook. Written by Reinhardt. Chapter 1 The Ceremony of Obedience. The sanctum of binding reeked of burnt myrrh and old iron. The air was thick with incense and expectancy, pressing down upon the 100 assembled like a second skin. Beneath the high obsidian archways, carved with symbols of lunar obedience and divine hierarchy, the silence was weaponized. Kieran Ravemarch stepped through the sanctum's gates in full regalia, black armor gilded with the blood-marked sigil of House Ravemarch. His steps were as precise as a war drum, echoing on polished onyx. Every alpha in the royal house watched him pass, measuring his composure, noting the sharpness of his jaw, the unreadable cold in his eyes. He did not bow to the altar. High Priestess Mavira raised her thin, silver-ringed hand. "Bring forth the Omega." A pair of temple guards emerged, dragging the figure clad in ceremonial white. The cloth was almost luminous under the moonlight streaming from the dome above, so bright it was hard to look directly at him. Iskil Valerian's wrists were bound before him in silver-threaded cords. He walked, not resisting, yet not yielding, head bowed, back straight, lips sealed. Kieran's gaze locked on him the moment he entered. The scent hit him like a blow to the chest, clean frost, wet stone, and something sweeter hidden beneath it, like crushed lilac under snow. The sharp tang of Omega, but tempered, restrained, as if taught to silence even his own biology. Kieran's pupils dilated. His breath caught. That was when it started. The glow at their feet, subtle at first. Threads of pale silver light unfurling across the sanctum floor like roots seeking water, lacing around the altar, around the Omega's bare feet. The binding array was awakening. Iskil finally lifted his head. Their eyes met. Kieran had seen war. He had seen death, dismemberment, starvation, madness. But nothing undid him like the fragile, hollowed gaze that met his own, gray-blue eyes like a storm long after it had passed. There was no defiance in them, no plea, just the terrible, devastating awareness. The Omega's pulse synced with his. Kieran could feel it, buried beneath skin, stitched to his bones. His chest constricted. His wolf stirred. And then he moved. Faster than thought, Kieran strode forward, ignoring the gasp from the elders. His armored hand shot out, seized the ritual mirror, and slammed it face down on the altar. It shattered with a scream of silver, shards cutting lines through the glowing array. The binding stopped mid-glow, sputtering into flickering arcs. Gasps erupted. High Priestess Mavira stepped forward, her tone sharp with alarm. "Prince Kieran." He didn't let her finish. He turned to Iskil, grabbed the Omega by the throat. Not hard, not enough to bruise, but enough to force his head back, and spoke, loud and clear, "This is not my mate." His voice rang through the chamber, cold and final. "He is a vessel, a tool, and he has failed." Iskil made no sound. The glow beneath their feet died. Kieran released him, stepping back as the guards rushed forward to pull the Omega away. He didn't watch them. He couldn't. His chest felt too tight. The scent lingered, embedded under his skin. His hands trembled as he flexed his fingers. He turned sharply and left the sanctum. But the moment he stepped beyond the gate, his knees buckled. The world tilted. His breath caught halfway through his lungs and refused to finish. Every heartbeat came with a flash behind his eyes, of blood, of teeth, of a silver-blue gaze going lifeless. He clutched his chest. Something inside him howled. Kieran stumbled to the side of the steps, bracing himself against the wall. His vision doubled. The pain was sharp, clawing, burning up his spine and down his arms. His fingers split, blood seeping from the nail beds. What the hell is this? A hallucination? But the scent was still there. Not just around him, inside him, He collapsed to one knee, hand pressed to the stone floor. Blood dripped freely from his fingertips. His wolf was clawing at the edges of his sanity. He should have marked him. He should have run. He didn't know which. In the depths of Moonspine Prison, far from the marble sanctuaries and golden altars of the capital, a door sealed itself behind the bound Omega. The room was lightless. The chains bit into Iskil's skin, but he did not flinch. He had not flinched when the prince had rejected him. He had not moved when called a tool. But now, in the dark, he opened his eyes. His breathing was calm, unbroken. And then the voice came, not from the walls, not from memory, but from within the marrow of his mind. It was ancient, and it was waiting. Did you see it? The whisper coiled like smoke. The blood, the throne, your body at his feet. Iskil didn't answer. He only exhaled. And in the cell's silence, something very old and very wrong began to awaken. Ashkur Dravanth, the forsaken wolf of the dead moon, stirred in the darkness. Chapter 2: The Wolf Who Would Not Kneel. Ravemarch War Court was never meant for blood, though it smelled faintly of it. The ceiling stretched higher than most towers, a dome of black glass etched with the battles of Alpha Kings past. At the room's center, a single silver disc embedded in obsidian marked where rulers stood to receive judgment or deliver it. That morning, Prince Kirin Ravemarch stood upon it like a wolf surrounded by leashes, glaring at the council that dared question him. "You shattered the binding array," barked Counselor Viral, his bony finger twitching toward the glowing script that hovered above the courtroom. "You laid hands on a bonded Omega. You severed a right with no approval." "I ended a mistake before it became an abomination," Kirin replied coolly. His voice echoed, steady but wrapped in strain. "There was no bond, only a reaction. A chemical accident, nothing more." Counselor Viral's lips tightened. "The array disagrees." Kirin smiled without warmth. "The array doesn't wear the mark. I do." High Priestess Mavira, robed in morning indigo and bearing the sigil of the lunar eye, said nothing for the first part of the hearing. She only watched, unblinking, as the prince twisted his wrist slowly beneath his gauntlet, again and again, as though something beneath the skin itched or burned. The chamber dimmed with her voice. "And if it wasn't a bond," she said, "why did the blood on your hands glow like it did?" Kirin's jaw clenched. He didn't respond. Sereth Halvine, commander of the royal guard and the only one allowed to stand beside the prince without invitation, shifted his weight imperceptibly. No one else noticed, but Mavira did. "The Omega was seen to respond," she continued, "even under restraint. His vital rhythms aligned to yours. His scent fluctuated." "I said it wasn't a bond," Kirin snarled, his voice cracking sharp across the floor. The script above them flickered. "Silence." Viral coughed gently. "Your Highness, the mark you carry is not just a title. It is a chain whether you acknowledge it or not. And you are behaving like it weighs more than you admit." Kirin exhaled, slow and violent. He knew they could all smell it now, the thread of sweat beneath his collar, the edge of something feral behind his skin. Even Sereth had tensed, subtly lowering his hand near the hilt of his blade. He needed to get out of this chamber before they saw the crack spreading deeper, before they realized how close he was to snapping. "Do what you want with the Omega," he muttered, stepping down from the circle. "Wash him, bind him, bury him. It makes no difference to me." Mavira tilted her head. "That is permission, then?" Kirin didn't look back. "It's disinterest." But even as he left the war court, that word tasted like a lie in his mouth. Far below the surface of the palace, the Moonspine prison was quieter than death. Iskil Valerian hadn't spoken in days. There was no one to speak to, and his throat had been scorched by a concoction of truth-root and wolf silence, a blend the priests used when they wanted someone to listen and never reply. They'd moved him from the stone box to a place called the Reflection Hall. He'd known the name only because it was etched into the wall in letters that shimmered in and out of existence. There were no windows, no doors, just a ceiling that breathed when he did. Mavira entered alone. "You smell calmer now," she said, walking in a slow circle around his bound figure. "Not like wildfire, not like a prince." Iskil kept his eyes on the floor. "I need you to understand something," she murmured, kneeling beside him. "The mistake that happened in the sanctum was not your fault. The prince is unstable. You were exposed to that instability." Still, he said nothing. "But that's what the scouring is for. We'll strip the response from your bones. We'll clean out the echo. After that, you'll be perfectly still again." She placed her hand on his chest, over where the ritual robes still clung to his collarbone. "We're going to make you holy again, Iskil." He finally looked up, and for the first time since the ceremony, Mavira saw it. The flicker, the tremble just beneath the irises, the place where something wild had begun to whisper. That night, Kieran dreamt in heat and salt. The room was cold. His skin was clammy. The blankets tangled around him like a cage, and even in sleep, his muscles spasmed with the tension of restraint. Iskil stood before him again, this time not in robes, not in silence. He stood naked in firelight, lit from below by a pale moon that had no sky to hang from. His lips moved, but the voice did not come from his throat. "You feel it. You can't stop it." Kieran reached for him, but in the dream his hand turned to claws. And when he touched the Omega's throat, it bruised. And when he pulled him close, the blood gushed bright across both their bodies, hot and sweet and endless. Kieran's mouth opened, and instead of words, he howled. He woke choking, shivering, nails embedded into his own palms. His tongue was bitten. Blood pooled in his mouth. The scent was still there, not just in memory. It had become part of him. He staggered out of bed and walked, half-dressed, barefoot, out into the upper corridor, pushing past servants and guards. No one dared stop him. No one met his eyes. He made it halfway down the corridor before his vision split. He caught himself against the mirror, but it wasn't his reflection that looked back. The face in the glass was older, wilder. Its eyes were black-rimmed gold. His grin was not his own, and it whispered, "You kill him and you become me." Chapter 3: The Salt Beneath His Skin. There was no sky in the chamber of scouring, only heat and stone, and the ever-present taste of salt that soaked through everything: air, sweat, breath, and bone. Iskil stood naked at the edge of the pool, arms bound behind him with binding silk still etched in prayer symbols. The robes were gone, cut away without ceremony. No one spoke to him, not even the acolytes who moved around the chamber adjusting crystals and flame. They handled him like one might handle glass, fragile, dangerous, easily discarded. The water below steamed gently, the scent thick with minerals and something sharper: wolf's ash, an old purging technique meant to weaken all non-alpha nerve systems. "Begin," came Mavira's voice from the upper platform. Iskil was pushed forward. He didn't fight the descent. The heat hit him like 1,000 blades, but he didn't scream. His body arched briefly from the sudden contact, skin shivering as his lungs fought for control. And then he went still. The pool wasn't deep, but it was hot enough to make breathing painful. Steam clouded his vision. His hair clung wetly to his neck. And underneath the surface, faintly glowing in runes only the initiated would recognize, the etching of the chamber awakened. Pain came not in sharp waves but in whispers, a pulse against the soles of his feet, a tingling across his wrists. Then it rose, coiled into the base of his spine like a cold worm, seeping into nerves, splitting the world into two tracks, one real, one manufactured. The scouring had begun. Sereth stood just beyond the archway, shielded by a ceremonial veil, hand on the hilt of his blade. He wasn't supposed to be there, not in this phase. This part of the ritual was meant for clerics alone. But he'd insisted, or lied, said the prince had ordered him to oversee. He'd never seen Iskill like this. The Omega had always been silent, even in the courtyard, even during the binding. But here, bound in steam, pale skin cut with the red lattice of sensory enchantments, Iskill was more than silent. He was calm. Too calm. The first pulse hit him. Iskill flinched. His jaw tensed. But he didn't cry out. Sereth could hear the high-frequency whine that accompanied the neural shock, a spell laced into the water itself, designed to scramble unwanted memory, to dissolve involuntary attachments, to burn out affection that should never have existed. Again, the second pulse. A spasm this time. Iskill's spine jerked. He bit down on nothing. A drop of blood trickled from one nostril. Still no sound. The third pulse was stronger. It didn't just strike his body, it struck his mind. Color broke across his vision. Sensation sharpened, then fractured. He felt the entire weight of his own body pressing into his lungs, and somewhere behind it, there it was. The scent. Salt. Stone. Fire. Metal. Alpha. It was buried, but not deep enough. He felt it ripple through him, not as memory but as reaction. Kieran. The name didn't come in words, came in weight, in voice, and then, I command you to return. The voice split through his skull. Not a whisper, not an echo, a direct transmission. He gasped. The chamber shimmered, magic faltering for a half-second. The pool lights sputtered. On the upper platform, Mavira stiffened. What was that? She asked sharply. An acolyte leaned close. The subject's resonance just spiked. Higher than his baseline? Far above. Alpha range thresholds. Mavira stared into the pool. He shouldn't still be responding. Inside the water, Iskill blinked once. Blood in his eyes. His hands still bound. But his lips moved. Not a word. Not a sentence. Just a breath of sound. Kieran. No one heard it but him. Sereth clenched his fists. Stop the ritual, he muttered, stepping forward. A guard blocked his path. Don't interfere, the priest hissed. You know what she'll do. Sereth said nothing, but his hand dropped to the dagger at his side. Later, they left Iskill alone in the cooling water. He could not move. Every nerve screamed. Every inch of skin burned with residual arc light. His back bore the lattice of the scouring, crimson lines that would take weeks to fade, if they ever did. He let his body float, slack as a corpse. Only his mind remained tethered. That voice, that tone. He had heard it in the sanctum, and again in the dark. But now it was undeniable. It hadn't come from memory. It hadn't come from longing. It had come from Kieran. They were still bound. Even if the court said no. Even if the prince denied it. Even if the rituals failed. They were still bound. He drifted down, letting his body sink to the bottom, ignoring the pain. The pool grew colder the deeper he fell. Light vanished. The stone below his feet felt ancient, broken in places. He let his fingers trail the cracks. And then his skin brushed something sharp. A jagged edge, buried in the tiles at the very bottom of the scouring pool. A plate of blackened stone, broken in half, with old glyphs carved so deeply the magic still shimmered. He pressed a hand to it. The pulse responded. And then he saw the name, Eshkur Draventh. Below it, only one line remained readable. Those who fail the binding shall not return. Their souls are claimed, their fire doused. He stared at it. The water pressed against his throat like a hand, and still he did not scream. Chapter 4, The Bite He Shouldn't Remember. The scent of iron was everywhere. It clung to the bark, to the stone, to the thick, crushed earth beneath Kieran's boots. It dripped from the claw marks he'd left in the bodies of 3 soldiers, all unconscious now, if not worse, slumped in a silent arc behind him. He stood at the edge of the clearing, breath ragged, chest bare and scratched, one shoulder still twitching where his armor had snapped. His mouth tasted like blood. Not his. The haze still hadn't cleared. Not even the cold wind slicing down from the mountains could cool the heat behind his eyes. He had warned them to stay back, had warned them not to draw weapons, and yet he'd lunged. The wolf had risen, and the man had led it. Sareth approached slowly from the tree-lean, gloved hands lifted in cautious deference. "They'll live," he said. Kieran didn't answer. He pressed a thumb against his lower lip, then licked the blood from it absently, almost thoughtfully. "You shouldn't be out here," Sareth continued. "Not in this state." "I'm fine," Kieran said flatly. "You tore out part of Darren's throat." "He shouldn't have touched me," Sareth sighed, casting a look at the half-buried sword in the mud. "The court's already asking questions. They'll smell the blood, even if you wipe the floor clean." Kieran turned away. "Then let them choke on it." Behind him, Sareth shifted again. "Do you want me to retrieve the Omega?" Silence. Kieran's body locked for a moment, just a flicker, a tension along the shoulders. Then he exhaled, slow and tight. "No, but the scent." "I said no." Sareth hesitated. Then, "You said to bring him to the sanctum yesterday. You sent a rider." "I changed my mind." Kieran turned, and his eyes were not golden anymore. They were dark, almost black, rimmed with faint threads of crimson. "Don't let me see him," he said, voice a growl scraped from something deeper than bone. "If I see him, I'll mark him." Sareth nodded once, jaw clenched. "Understood." Kieran didn't wait for dismissal. He stepped deeper into the woods, into the part of the forest the soldiers no longer trained in. The trees were denser here, gnarled and crooked like old bones. Wind barely touched the ground. The moss was slick underfoot. He walked until the taste of blood faded from his tongue, until the heat in his bones stopped clawing. But it didn't stop. He crouched beside the stream hours later, elbows resting on his knees, watching the thin line of red still seeping from his palm. He'd bitten through the glove. The flesh there was raw, wet, glistening. The puncture marks were jagged, not clean, and the blood was slow, almost reluctant. The pain wasn't sharp. It was dull, persistent, familiar, like the memory that wouldn't leave. That scent again. Salt, skin, that half-formed echo of something sweeter buried beneath. He could feel it still, hidden in the back of his throat, the ghost of it, the way Iskiel had tasted when he pressed too close, when he'd almost... No, he hadn't. He'd stopped himself. But his body remembered. Every inch of him remembered. And no matter how many times he stripped the bedsheets, the scent never fully left. He reached down, dipped his hand into the stream. Cold water closed around the wound, and his muscles twitched from the shock. He held it there, longer than he needed, long enough to pretend the sting was from something else. When he looked up again, the sky had gone dark. And there, across the stream, half shadowed by trees, someone stood. Not real. He knew that instantly. Too still, too silent, too pale. But his body responded before thought caught up. Iskiel. The figure didn't move. He rose slowly. The water rolled off his hand. "You're not here," Kieran whispered. The figure took a step forward. His throat tightened. "You're not supposed to be here." The hallucination tilted its head, and he could swear, could feel the warmth of that gaze sliding down his face. He knew that gaze, because he'd invented it. He'd remembered it too well. He turned sharply, forced himself to walk back toward the clearing. His hands were trembling again. Every movement of muscle ached like it had been overused. He thought the vision would fade when he left the forest. But it didn't. That night, sleep didn't come. Crashed. He dropped into the dream like a man hurled off a cliff. No warning. No breath. Just heat and darkness. An Iskill. But not the version from the chamber. This one stood bare in moonlight, silver blue hair damp against his throat, breath soft, chest rising and falling like he belonged to no one but the silence. Kieran knew it wasn't real, but it didn't matter. He reached out, and this time the Omega didn't vanish. He stepped forward until they were inches apart, until Kieran could see the faint shimmer of sweat on his collarbone. The curve of his lips parted not in pain, but in invitation. "Say it," Kieran whispered. Iskill looked at him. "If I don't kill you," Kieran said, "would you stay?" Silence. Then, "Yes." Kieran exhaled. The dream twisted. He grabbed the Omega by the jaw, pulled him close, forehead to forehead. Every inch of skin burned. Every breath between them was a war of restraint. His lips ghosted the curve of Iskill's throat. Then, his eyes snapped open. He was alone, sweating. His hand was in his mouth again. Blood leaked from where he'd bitten too deep. The wolf inside him was howling. But no voice came from outside, because the Omega was gone, locked away, hidden. And Kieran had told everyone, even himself, he didn't want to see him again. But the truth sat in his mouth like blood. He already had. Chapter 5, The Prisoner's First Command. The air in the lower sanctum didn't move. Not in the way air should, not with breath, not with warmth. It pressed like glass on skin, thick and brittle and too sharp to inhale. Even the torches along the walls burned in silence, their smoke curling upward but never dispersing, caught in the stillness of the ritual space. Iskill Valerian was stripped of robes, again. Only the ink remained, thin lines across his collarbones, throat, ribs, ritual sigils reactivated against his will. His wrists were locked into the stone grooves of the ancient imprint table, forged long before even the current crown, laced with silver threads designed to bind Omegas to silence. He had stopped asking what day it was. That was no longer relevant. Mavira stood at the edge of the array, her hands outstretched, palms bleeding into a bowl of moon-slicked liquid. Across from her, a beta boy, barely grown into his voice, stood trembling. He was shirtless, his back raw from the ritual lashes. His eyes didn't meet Iskill's. They stared past him, toward the carved mouth of the altar. He didn't want this either, but that didn't matter. "Begin the transfer," Mavira said. Acolytes moved. Runes flared. The broken remnant of a long-abandoned mating seal. The half-mark glowed dull green on the floor, flickering with unstable energy. This was no sanctified rite. It was a graft, a forced echo, stolen from the blood of a failed binding and sutured into the skin of a new body. The moment the light touched his ankles, Iskill's pulse jolted. He grit his teeth. His body convulsed not from pain, not yet, but from refusal. His blood rejected it. His scent soured, sharp as flint. The attempt to fuse his resonance with another's, it scraped along every thread of his nervous system like fire in reverse. The beta whimpered. The array surged brighter. And then Iskill whispered, "No." The word barely crossed his lips. The symbols around the circle flared to red. "Stabilize it," someone yelled. Too late. Iskill's eyes rolled back, body arched, shoulders locked hard against the stone. Not from seizure. From something far older, far deeper, from something waking. He did not see the beta boy anymore. He saw snow, red snow, a throne made of antlers, hands larger than his, familiar in heat and weight, on his hips, pulling him back into a ritual that had never truly ended. And a voice, not inside his head this time, in his mouth. "Kieran." The name tore free like blood from a wound, and the room shattered. Sereth felt it first, not as sound, but pressure. A sharp twist behind the ribs, as though something had grabbed his lungs and clenched. He was 5 levels above, guarding a stair that hadn't been used in centuries. When the air changed, he drew breath, and the scent hit him, alpha resonance. But not from the beta child. From below. He ran. In the sanctum, all hell had broken loose. The array burst open, sigils exploding upward like shattered teeth. Light struck the walls, cracking sacred stone. Acolytes screamed, their robes scorched by backlash. The beta dropped to the floor, convulsing. Iskiel, still bound, arched once more. This time not in rejection, but in connection. And somewhere far away, miles beyond the prison, in the Rave March military camp where the prince was being held for reconditioning, Kieran Rave March collapsed mid-step, hands clawed into his own scalp. He howled. The sound wasn't human. It shattered helmets, split stone. The soldiers around him scrambled. Sereth's name was on someone's lips, but Kieran heard nothing. He was elsewhere, in a place with heat, with scent, with breath that wasn't his own. His eyes flooded gold. He felt teeth in his neck that hadn't bitten yet. Felt hands on his chest that didn't exist. He reached forward. In the sanctum, Mavira stood alone now, robes in disarray, lips bloodied from the force of her last binding attempt. She stared at the Omega on the stone, still bound, skin glistening with sweat, blood, steam. He was breathing hard, but not in pain, in rhythm. His body vibrated with a pulse that wasn't his. With command. The remnants of the shattered array still floated around him. Glow dust, broken sigils, crackling remnants of a seal that had failed. Not failed. Reversed. Unbind him, Mavira said quietly. No one moved. She stepped forward. Her fingers shook. Iskiel's eyes opened slowly. No rage. No violence. Just a calm so deep it scraped the floor of sanity. And in that silence, Mavira whispered, "We marked him wrong." Her voice trembled. "We made him the vessel." She looked down at the broken imprinting mirror, its reflective shards forming a spiral around the boy's spine. "But he's the anchor." The final rune on the array sparked once, then dimmed. And from its ruined edge, in words older than any living priest could remember, a sentence burned itself into the stone. The dominant mark cannot be reversed. She stepped back and stared at him. Prisoner still, but no longer the one in chains. Chapter 6: The Heat Between the Chains. The guards never saw him coming. Kieran moved through the lower corridors of the prison like a shadow born of hate and want. The torches flickered in his wake, metal doors warping from the ambient heat leaking off his skin. His blood was boiling, not from anger, at least not entirely, but from something older, more primal. The wolf in him had stopped pacing. It was snarling now. He'd fought the summons for 3 nights. 3 nights of sleepless pacing, cold baths, sparring until his knuckles cracked, scenting strangers just to burn out his lungs. But nothing worked. Nothing muted it. Iskiel's scent had returned. Not faint, not distant, sharp, burnt into him. And tonight it was unbearable. So he stopped fighting it. He let it guide him. He found the boy in the 3rd cell under heavy guard. 2 stationed priests sat by the door, dozing upright, their hands curled around charm rods meant to suppress bonded responses. Useless now that the bond had reversed. Kieran dropped them with ease. No blood, just silence. 1 breath, 1 crack of bone. He didn't bother taking the keys. The iron door melted under his palm. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. The Omega sat curled on the stone floor, arms chained loosely to the wall above, posture too still for sleep. He didn't lift his head at first, but as Kieran entered, the eyes flickered open. Iskiel said nothing, But Kieran's lungs constricted instantly. The scent, gods, stronger than he remembered. Under the grime, the dried blood, the cold, there it was. Not perfume, not musk, a chemical truth. It made his knees lock and his jaw ache. He crossed the room in 4 strides, unlatched the chains from the wall. Iskill didn't resist. His body went limp as Kieran hauled him up and over a shoulder like a sack of cloth and bones. The contact nearly undid him. Bare skin grazed his neck. He almost dropped him from the shiver that rolled down his spine. Instead, he growled and stalked toward the back tunnels, to the one room no priest had touched since the war, his own. The training darkroom, the wolf chamber, the place where alphas went to be alone with their instincts. He kicked open the stone door. Inside, the walls were padded in leather. No torches, only faintly glowing runes along the floor, enough to shape shadows and scent trails. No restraints, only chains that hung from the ceiling like decorations or threats. He set Iskill on the central bench. The Omega remained quiet, eyes only half open, breath slow. Kieran didn't know what he expected. Resistance? Fear? But there was none of it, which somehow made everything worse. He unspooled the chain with deliberate precision, wrapped it twice around Iskill's wrists, then pulled it taut against the upper beam. No protest, only breath. He stood back, staring. Iskill's head tilted, hair falling to one side. "You're not going to ask what I'm doing?" Kieran rasped. "I already know," the Omega replied. His voice was dry, but not weak. It wasn't defiant either. It was knowing. Kieran's teeth clenched. He stepped forward and shoved Iskill's knees apart. Not roughly, not kindly. Just enough to feel. Enough for the heat between their bodies to reach that dangerous threshold. The Omega didn't flinch, but his breath hitched. Barely. Kieran leaned in. Didn't kiss him. Just inhaled. Close enough for lips to almost brush. For his cheek to graze Iskill's jawline. He breathed in hard, deep, until his chest ached. The scent roared through him like wildfire. He saw the binding circle again. The flash of silver skin. The blood that hadn't yet been drawn. His hand rose, shaking, to the curve of Iskill's throat. The wolf in him pushed. Now, bite, mark, take. His mouth opened. Teeth scraped skin. He froze. The tremble in his chest turned to a quake. His jaw locked mid-motion. He couldn't do it. Couldn't complete it. Because once he did, he wouldn't leave. Ever. And he'd sworn never to belong to anything. Especially not this. He pulled back, breath heaving. Iskill stared up at him. Half-lidded. Throat bare. Skin flushed. But his voice was soft. Sharp. "You're not here to punish me." Kieran didn't move. "You're here because you need it," Iskill said. "The scent. The heat. Me." Kieran growled, low and furious. But Iskill's voice turned colder. "You're not afraid of losing control," he whispered. "You're afraid that once you let yourself have me, you'll never be able to stop." Something snapped. Kieran shoved back, tearing the chain loose from the beam with one yank, letting Iskill collapse forward. He caught himself on his knees, wrists still bound. Kieran turned, stormed to the door. His hand shook on the frame. Iskill's voice followed him. Quiet, wounded, certain. "You don't hate me," he said. "You hate that I make you want to kneel." Kieran didn't answer, but he bit his palm on the way out, deep enough to taste blood, deeper than before. And the only word in his mind, echoing like a curse and a prayer, was one he'd refused too long. Mate. Chapter 7, The Chain Between Their Throats. The silence in the council chamber was not reverent. It was coiled, bristling, sharp, like a trap that had already been triggered but hadn't yet snapped. Kieran stood at the center of the hollow, flanked by 2 unmoving guards. His arms crossed, The edges of his gloves stained faintly red from the earlier sparring session he'd never finished. Every word the council spoke struck his ears like insects buzzing too close to the kill point. "I didn't come here to ask permission," he said finally, voice low, teeth tight. "I came to inform you." Counselor Viral looked down his long nose, voice mild. "You wish to relocate the Omega to your private medical tower. A structure designed, we remind you, for bonded mates only. Ritual-paired individuals." "He is bonded," Kieran said. "Then where is the mark?" Kieran didn't speak. High Priestess Mavira's gaze pierced him from her seat to the left of the circle, calm and unreadable. "You rejected him before witnesses. You broke the binding. If you now claim him as yours, you must offer proof." Kieran's jaw twitched. "You saw what happened during the failed grafting." "We saw chaos," Viral replied. "We saw a sanctum collapse, a beta nearly killed, and the prisoners speak your name like a command. That's not proof of mating. That's a threat." Kieran's laugh was soft, dangerous. "Maybe you should be afraid. That's precisely why we require regulation," Mavira said. He took a step forward. "The boy is mine." "No," she corrected, rising to her feet. "Not until the mark binds both of you. Not until the chain is visible. Until then, he remains a ward of the crown. And of the church." Kieran's fists clenched. "You'll regret. You will control yourself." The room went still as Sereth entered from the side passage, a silent storm of quiet armor and careful words. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Kieran didn't look at him, but he stopped talking. The door to his private chambers slammed hard enough to make the runes in the wall flare. Iskiel sat where he'd been placed, wrists no longer bound, though his skin bore faint rings of pressure where the cuffs had been. He didn't move when Kieran entered, didn't flinch when the prince paced the floor like a caged wolf. "You can speak," Kieran said, not looking at him. Iskiel tilted his head. "I know." Kieran paused, turned. "Then why don't you? What is there to say? You were nearly grafted to a half-blooded beta last week. And that doesn't bother you?" The Omega's lips curved faintly. "It would have been less complicated." Kieran's temper flared without warning. He crossed the room in 3 steps and slammed a hand to the wall beside Iskiel's head. "You're not leaving. I didn't ask to. You think this is a game?" "I think you're not sure what it is," Iskiel murmured. Their faces were inches apart. Kieran's hands shook. He couldn't smell anything else anymore. No food, no fire, no metal or magic. Just that scent. That ruinous, perfect salt and frost. That scent that now ruled every breath he took. He wanted to chain it, silence it, devour it. He wanted to stop needing it. "Why won't you ask me to stay?" Iskiel said softly. Kieran swallowed. "Because you might say no." Iskiel's head tilted again. "Then tell me to obey." The wolf surged. He grabbed the Omega by the throat. Not tight, not crushing, but enough to feel his pulse. Enough to feel it race. Iskiel didn't fight him. He stared back with those gray-blue eyes like glass long after the storm. "You want me here as your prisoner," he said, voice calm. "Not your mate." Kieran's grip tightened. "Because if I'm your mate," Iskiel whispered, "you lose every reason to hate me." Kieran moved fast. One heartbeat. He shoved him back against the wall, one knee sliding between Iskiel's thighs, mouth at his neck. The wolf was louder now. "Mark him. Now." His teeth grazed skin. Iskiel shuddered, not in fear, but in reaction. The scent exploded between them. Kieran inhaled so hard it burned his lungs. But he didn't bite. He cursed, tore himself away, slammed a hand into the mirror so hard it cracked. "You don't get to say that to me," he growled, voice low and shaking. Iskiel stepped forward, chains at his ankles still clinking faintly. He stood behind Kieran, silent. Then softly, "You're not trying to tame me, Kieran. You're slowly giving yourself to me." Kieran turned. Their eyes locked, and the pain came, sharp, immediate. Both of them gasped. A light burst around their throats, a thin, luminous thread of silver. Not a single mark, a double ring, a mirrored glow. One wrapping Iskil's neck, the other Kieran's. The chains between them shimmered, faint, but there. Not a bond, not yet, but the beginning of one. Kieran stumbled back. "No," he breathed. Iskil didn't move. He didn't smile. He didn't speak again. But the ring of light around his throat pulsed once. And Kieran knew. The choice was no longer just his. Chapter 8: The Scar You Gave Me. The moonlight in Moonvale Sanctum was never real. It filtered through crystal latticework designed to imitate the lunar phases, refracted through spellglass until it shimmered blue across the marble floors. But tonight, it looked like a drowned sky, and Iskil was the only thing breathing beneath it. He lay still on the obsidian slab, wrists bound above his head with prayer-threaded cuffs. A circle of priests surrounded him, mute, robed, faceless. At the center stood Mavira, her expression sharper than her blade, holding the silver ring between two fingers like it was no more than a trinket. It wasn't. It was a binding relic. The submission ring. The curse craft etched inside it had been outlawed centuries ago. But tonight it returned. "You are too loud," Mavira said softly, as if explaining to a child. "You call to him in your sleep. You whisper in battle. You tether a prince like a collar, and he drags himself to you. Even the wolf inside him kneels." She held the ring over his throat. Iskil didn't flinch. "I won't break you," she continued. "I will quiet you. You'll still breathe, still serve. But the voice, the resonance, will fall silent." He said nothing, until the cold iron touched his skin. Then, low and quiet, he murmured, "He's already hearing someone else." The ring flared. Pain ignited across his spine, shooting straight up into his brain. His limbs seized, his back arched, eyes wide but seeing nothing. And in the space between pain and breath, he dreamed. The dream wasn't his. It bled like a memory that didn't belong, and yet curled inside his bones like a forgotten name. He stood at the edge of a pit, stone walls scorched and damp. Smoke rose from the center, but it wasn't fire, it was scent. A scent that brought wolves to their knees and made men claw at their own throats. At the bottom, an Omega knelt, throat marked, body trembling. Dozens watched in silence as he lifted his head toward the beast above him. A wolf, towering, crowned with bone, eyes like burning obsidian. Ishker. The wolf leaned forward, mouth open, not to speak, to consume. He bit, not the neck, the heart, and the world fractured into howls. Iskil woke mid-scream, except his mouth didn't open. The ring around his throat pulsed with every beat of his heart, caging the sound before it could leave his lips. But he felt it, Kieran, somewhere far off, shaking, raging. The bond had turned again. He could feel Kieran's claws against stone, teeth bared at his own soldiers. The prince was unraveling, and it was his fault. He closed his eyes, then opened them. There was a hairpin still lodged in his cuff, left there deliberately, perhaps by accident, perhaps not. His hands bled as he worked it loose. The ring glowed brighter, sensing rebellion. He didn't care. With one smooth motion, he pried it from his throat, seared his fingers, tore skin, but came off. The pain was staggering. The voice came rushing back. Kieran's scream. The bond re-engaged. The heat surged into his chest. His knees buckled, but there was no time. He crawled to the small ceremonial dish on the altar beside him, used for anointment, forgotten tonight. Inside it, a thin silver pin lay embedded in wax. He took it. No hesitation. He brought it to his throat. paused, just a breath, then drove it in, not deep enough to kill, just enough to bleed, to disrupt the resonance, to sever the echo, to save him. His blood dripped down his chest in perfect silence. His vision spun, and somewhere, miles away, Kieran fell to his knees. He woke later, half slumped against the broken slab, skin cold, breathing shallow. The ring lay shattered beside him. The light in the sanctum had dimmed. Something whispered from the walls. No, beneath them. He turned his head toward the base of the altar, toward a cracked, half-buried slab he'd never seen before. His blood had dripped onto it. It shimmered. Text emerged, slow and smoking. Ancient glyphs rearranged themselves into something terrible and familiar. He read them aloud without knowing why. "You are walking the path I burned," the slab whispered. The voice came not through ears but bones. "You are wearing the chains I forged." Then, at the edge of consciousness, the name, Ishkar. And beneath it, a single epithet, the slave binder. The letters seared into the air as his vision went dark again. And Iskiel knew. The bond wasn't just between him and Kieran anymore. Something else had returned. And it had once worn a crown made of wolves. Chapter 9. Obey me like you used to pray. The war hall was cracked open like a skull. The throne dais lay fractured, its silver filigree twisted into jagged arcs. 2 guards were already dead, one with his throat half gone, the other still smoldering from where Kieran's claws had raked his chest. Stone tiles bore the imprint of claw marks and boot prints soaked in blood. The scent of madness clung to every inch of the chamber. And at the center of it all, Kieran Ravemarch crouched shirtless on the steps of the ruined dais, hair disheveled, hands dripping. His chest heaved with each breath, his irises flooded with gold and shadow. He looked feral, untouchable, unreachable. No one dared speak, not until the door groaned open again, and a single figure stepped into the chaos, unarmed and barefoot. Iskiel. He moved like he'd been summoned, though no call had gone out. He stepped across the war-scorched tiles in silence, ignoring the way the remaining guards shrank from him, as though the echo of whatever had passed through Kieran had passed through him as well. The bond had called, and he had come. Kieran lifted his head the moment Iskiel entered. The prince's entire body went still. Not relaxed, no, not that, but still. Iskiel walked to the base of the throne steps, eyes steady, the faintest sheen of sweat on his neck. The submission ring scar still glowed faintly at his collarbone. "Kieran," he said softly. That one word dragged the prince back like a hook in the chest. He inhaled once, sharp, hungry, and descended the steps in 2 fluid strides. Hands still bloody, face streaked with soot. He stopped in front of Iskiel. No words, just the sound of breath between 2 people who no longer had anything left to say. Kieran lifted a hand and pressed the back of it to Iskiel's forehead. It was a strange gesture, too tender to be a threat, too firm to be kind. The moment their skin touched, the Alpha exhaled, as if the fire inside him had found a name. "Down," Kieran whispered. Iskiel did not move. "You used to kneel," Kieran said louder. "You used to fold your hands and lower your eyes and pray." He stepped closer. "To gods who did not answer." He grabbed Iskiel by the shoulder and forced him down to his knees, right there on the cracked stone. The movement was rough but not vicious. A demand, not a punishment. Kieran's hand returned to Iskiel's forehead, pressed harder this time. "Now pray to me." Iskiel's breath hitched, but not from fear. He lifted his chin even as he knelt. "I don't pray anymore," he said quietly. "You will. I only ask for one thing now," Iskiel continued, eyes still locked with his. "To die clean, quickly, without begging." Kieran's hand trembled. The room was silent. The council watched from the periphery, paralyzed between duty and dread. "You don't mean that," Kieran said. Iskil didn't answer. "I saved you. You broke me." Their eyes locked. The tension stretched until the wolf inside Kieran broke free again. Not in a howl this time, but in possession. He grabbed Iskil by the jaw, pulled him forward, not into a kiss, into a claim. His lips crushed against the side of Iskil's throat, just above the place where the mark should have gone. But the moment his mouth touched skin, pain exploded through him, white hot. He reeled back with a roar, clutching his own hand. Smoke curled from his fingertips. His skin blistered in an ancient pattern. A symbol, old, twisted, not from the church, not from the crown, from something deeper. He stared at it in horror, a mirrored spiral across the pads of his fingers. Not burned into Iskil, burned into him. "You," he rasped, voice broken. "You marked me." Iskil didn't rise. He didn't flinch. He only met Kieran's gaze and said the words that sealed them both. "No. You marked yourself the moment you tried to own me." Chapter 10: The Omega Who Should Have Died. The cliffs were forbidden. Even in the maps of the Old Kingdom, the name was scratched out with red ink and wax seals. Ghosts didn't need directions. The wind knew where they waited. Sereth led them in silence. No armor, no weapons save for a single blade at his hip, unmarked, unblessed. A guard's knife, not a warrior's. He hadn't told Kieran. He hadn't told anyone. He drugged the hallway wardens with a sleeping mist stolen from the apothecaries and unlocked Iskil's cell before midnight. The Omega had not asked questions. He simply followed. Now they moved between dead pines and bones of trees too long drowned in salt wind, their roots clawing out from soil like hands that never reached salvation. The path was sharp with gravel, and steep enough that even Sereth bled by the time they reached the edge of the world. The cliffs yawned open before them, wind screaming through their chasm like it remembered the names of the ones who died here. And below, nestled in hollows carved from time, lay the graveyard of forgotten Omegas. Iskil stared down. He did not shiver, but something behind his ribs did. "They buried them here?" His voice was soft, too soft to fight the wind. "The ones who failed?" Sereth didn't answer at first. He stepped forward, crouched, brushed away the frost covering a runestone to reveal the sigil carved deep into its center. 3 linked circles, one shattered. "The ones who weren't meant to survive," he said. Iskil's feet moved without thought, as if something called to him. He passed rows of markers, some plain, some carved with the symbol of the church, others with no names at all. Only numbers, designations. Then he stopped. His knees gave out before his thoughts could catch them. A single stone, split down the middle, covered in moss and silence. And a name. His name. Iskil Valerian. Below it, a date of death. 18 years prior. His throat closed. The dirt beneath the stone was undisturbed. No grave, no body, just an inscription. Marked for sacrifice, not returned. He touched the stone. It was warm. And then the world split. The dream space didn't open with heat. It opened with pressure. Like drowning. Ishkur was waiting. Not in form. Not in voice. In presence. His shadow stretched long across the graves. "You are not chosen." The voice filled every pore. "You were never the vessel." Iskil couldn't breathe. They put the ring on the wrong throat. He tried to speak. Couldn't. "You were meant to die. 18 years ago. You were meant to break, to burn, to be a door. Not a man." The graves around him shifted. Names emerged. Crossed out. Erased. One by one they merged, all leading to his. He fell to his knees again, but this time not from control. From understanding. From rupture. When he woke, his hands were shaking. Sereth stood a few feet away, his face pale with something like grief. "You saw it," he said. Iskil nodded. They lied to you, Sereth added. No, Iskiel said, voice hoarse. They lied to themselves. I was never the mistake. I was the fail-safe. Sereth went still. Iskiel rose, slowly, pressing his hand once more to the stone. This time it burned less. I thought I was a tool, he whispered. But I was always the trap. The wind changed. Sereth turned sharply toward the ridge above. Hoofbeats. Steel. Too many. Iskiel met his eyes. You knew they'd come. Sereth drew his blade. I knew Mavira wouldn't let you see the truth and live. He sank to one knee. Not in shame. In choice. If you want to live, Iskiel, if you want to become more than what they made you, I'll betray everything I swore to protect. Iskiel stared at him. Then at the cliff. At the grave. At his name. Burned. Buried. Erased. Before he'd even learned what it meant. Behind them the riders approached. The ones who would finish what the priests started. But this time he wasn't going to kneel. Chapter 11, where the Alpha bleeds. The sky above the forbidden forest split open like a warning. Thunder rolled in too fast to be natural, dragging streaks of lightning through the branches like claws through silk. The air grew sharp with scent, blood, pine sap, and something older, deeper. Kieran tore through the undergrowth, cloak shredded, armor cracked. He didn't wait for orders, didn't bring a regiment. He'd launched himself from the city gates the moment the words reached him. They took him, not escaped, not transferred. Took. He hadn't remembered the shift, hadn't remembered the way his bones snapped out of alignment, the way his spine curved and surged into something wild. All he remembered was the hunger and the howl. Now he was barely man, barely wolf, something between, something bred from violence and bond and the unbearable absence of scent. Because Iskiel was gone, and Kieran could no longer smell him. Not on the wind, not in the trees, not in the soil. It was worse than pain. It was void. Ahead, through the veil of storm and moss, the riders came into view, Mavira's shadow-bound guard, clad in black veils and mounted on ashen wolves with runed harnesses. They carried no swords, only symbols. Erasure. Kieran didn't hesitate. He hit the first one like a meteor, claws raking through flesh, armor folding under his fury like wax. He didn't stop to question, didn't pause between bodies. He became wrath. A second rider tried to command him, sigils flaring, but his words were drowned in blood. Kieran shredded him at the throat. Then another. And another. The air stank of silver and ash. The trees wept bark. Still, it wasn't enough. Still, he couldn't smell him. And then, he did. Faint. Flickering. Like the memory of a name. A scent pushed through the chaos like a whisper through a scream. Salt. Stone. Cold, clean surrender. His entire body jerked toward it. He turned, and saw him. Iskiel stood beyond the clearing, unarmed, untethered, pale against the bruised sky. Wind pressed the folds of his cloak against his knees. His hair was damp, his wrists still raw from broken bonds. But he didn't flinch. Not even when Kieran stumbled forward like something wounded. Eyes wide, mouth parted in an animal's gasp. Blood dripped from Kieran's chin. He took one more step, then crumpled, just collapsed. No weapon touched him. No blade struck. He hit the ground on both knees, a growl twisting from his chest that became a strangled sound of agony. His hand clawed at his own chest, trying to tear through the leather and flesh and rib to reach what burned inside. A mark. New. Raw. Spreading. Ancient sigils crawled up from beneath his skin, glowing red-hot like they'd been branded straight into bone. The design twisted across his chest, spiraling around his sternum, etching their way toward his heart. He gasped, voice shattered. He's not near, I can't. He doubled over, forehead to the dirt, one fist pounding the ground so hard it cracked. I can't think. He wanted to rip the scent into his lungs. He wanted to hold it inside him and never let it leave. He needed to know Iskil was his, because without it he was falling apart. Iskil stepped forward. No rush, no fear, just forward. The guards, what was left of them, had long since scattered. He knelt slowly beside the prince who had once chained him like a beast. He touched Kieran's shoulder. The alpha flinched. His breath hitched again. "Don't," he rasped. "I'll hurt you. I can't stop it, Iskil pressed his forehead to Kieran's chest, right above the place the mark now burned. "Shut up," he whispered. "I'm still here." The pain slowed, not vanished, but slowed. Kieran shuddered under him. "I can't be without it," he said hoarsely. "The bond. I thought I could. But now it's in my blood. And it's you." Iskil's hand moved up, resting against Kieran's throat. Fingers soft, pulse steady. "I know," he murmured. "You shouldn't," Kieran said. "You should hate me. I probably will. Later." Silence stretched. Then Kieran laughed, bitter, broken, and relieved. The kind of laugh someone makes after surviving their own destruction. On the ridge above the forest, Mavira watched the scene unfold beneath her veil. She'd arrived just in time to see the blaze of light arc between them. Not one-sided, not jagged like the failed bindings, but smooth, complete, reversed. She narrowed her eyes. "The mark has turned," she said to the shadow beside her. Her acolyte shifted. "What does that mean?" Mavira smiled, cold, knowing. "It means he is no longer the alpha." She nodded toward the broken prince trembling in the dirt, forehead pressed to the Omega's chest like a beast begging for breath. "He is the bond's prey now, the echo, the receiver." She turned away, cloak snapping behind her. "And the Omega is the cage." Chapter 12: The Collar of Silence. The royal assembly chamber had never been quieter. The pillars rose like tombstones beneath the golden dome, catching the late sun in harsh slats across the marble floor. On the central dais, the circle of council stood in a perfect ring, 12 elders, 12 verdicts already etched in their expressions. In the middle of them stood Kieran Ravemarch, uncrowned, unbound, and unwell. He hadn't slept in 3 nights. The silver marks over his chest still itched like fire beneath his armor. His throat was dry, lips cracked, one hand resting over the pommel of the ceremonial blade at his hip, not drawn, not relaxed, just waiting. At the base of the dais, Iskil was made to kneel. He wasn't bound, not visibly, but the pressure of 12 pairs of eyes watching him with the same reverent detachment one gave to a ritual object did the work of shackles. He held himself still, barefoot, pale, and silent. Sereth stood behind him, face unreadable. High Priestess Mavira stepped forward from the inner circle. "We thank His Highness for his cooperation," she said without turning her eyes toward him. "To preserve balance in the capital and prevent future resonance surges, the Church offers a compromise." Her voice rang out over the hall. "We will not break the imprint." Kieran didn't flinch. "But," she continued, "we will temporarily contain it." She gestured, and a servant approached, bearing a small velvet box. Inside it, a collar, black leather, silver-laced runework, a single glyph pulsing at the front. Silence. Gasps fluttered across the upper rows. It was no ordinary binding tool. It was the resonance suppressor, a relic created during the Omega uprising 2 centuries ago, banned for its side effects: memory ghosting, heat disruption, and identity blurring. A collar for those too dangerous to be mated, and too sacred to be killed. Kieran didn't speak. He stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he took one step forward. The blade at his side shifted. Sereth's fingers twitched near his own hilt. "Kieran," someone murmured from the council. He turned his head. Not sharply, but the threat was there. No one else spoke. Then he laughed. Soft, cold. It echoed across the marble. "Well," he said, "at least you're honest about your gods being afraid of the thing they created." Mavira didn't react. "Will you comply?" she asked. He stepped forward again, reached for the box, took the collar in one hand. It was warm, alive almost, like it knew what it would do. The glyph pulsed once beneath his fingers. He didn't hand it to the priest. He turned, walked down the dais, stopped in front of Iskiel. Their eyes met, long and unreadable. Kieran knelt, not in submission, in ritual. He lifted the collar. Iskiel didn't move, not as the leather touched his neck, not as the rune flared once against his skin. Only when the buckle clicked shut did he whisper, "Will this satisfy them?" Kieran's hands paused at the final loop of the chain. He leaned in, close enough to let his breath warm the skin just under Iskiel's ear. "No," he said, "but it'll keep you breathing. For now." Then he wrapped the tail of the chain, not around Iskiel's neck, but his own wrist, and pulled it tight. Gasps rippled through the hall again. Kieran stood. Half the chain swung between them, metal on marble. "Let it be known," he said to no one and everyone, "that the prince accepts this silencing. Willingly." He looked down at Iskiel, the curve of collar, the slow rise of breath. "But I will keep the leash." Later, behind the council doors and away from the burning stairs, Kieran sat alone in the inner sanctum. Iskiel stood in the shadows, still collared. The rune on his throat now glowed a softer blue. But every time Kieran moved, even slightly, the chain tugged, and that pulse passed through the leather, through rune into skin. Iskiel felt it. Every breath, every tremor, a soft hum like a warning, or a heartbeat. He didn't speak, not even when Kieran dragged a hand through his hair, fingers trembling from restraint. Not even when Kieran looked up at him with eyes that weren't gold anymore, but full of something worse, need, and fury at that need. "You don't feel it now," Kieran said. "No." "Good." A pause. Then Kieran's voice dropped low, rough. "But I do." He lifted his wrist, the chain clinking softly as the tension pulled tight. "You can forget me," he whispered, "but I'll remember every breath of you that made me break." Iskiel watched him, quiet, still, then turned, about to walk away. Kieran didn't stop him. Not with hands. Not yet. But his voice followed like a blade at the spine. "When I take this leash off," Iskiel paused, "you better pray I don't mark you with my teeth before I let you beg." Chapter 13, The Moon That Tastes Like Blood. The sky above Forbidden Moon Ridge didn't hold stars. It held omens. They shimmered like teeth just past the clouds, sickle bright and sharp enough to slice thought from breath. The wind blew wild this high up, curling around stone pillars carved with the sigils of wolves long dead. Every step echoed with ancient hunger. Iskiel stood silent at the edge of the altar. The stone beneath him had once been used for binding rites, ceremonies when alphas laid claim not with law, but with instinct. Here markings weren't signed in ink. They were torn into skin. "You said it was a festival," Iskiel said. Kieran's hands tightened on the chain still wrapped around his wrist, trailing from the resonance collar at Iskiel's throat. He didn't answer. His jaw was locked, gaze fixed on the altar ahead. "It's no longer observed," Iskiel continued, gaze drifting toward the low burning fire in the center of the stone platform. "The church forbade." "I don't care what the church forbade," Kieran snapped. He finally looked at him. Iskiel held his gaze without flinching. Kieran exhaled once, sharply, then stepped closer. "You wear a collar that silences you," he said, voice low, steady. "You kneel in council halls like you belong to no one." He reached for Iskiel's throat, not to choke, but to feel. His fingers hovered just above the rune where the suppressor pulsed beneath pale skin. "But your scent," he murmured, "still drives me insane." He didn't ask permission, didn't pretend to. With a tug on the chain, Kieran pulled Iskill forward, spun him, pressed his chest to the altar stone. The Omega's hands landed flat on the surface, stone cold against his palms. He tensed, but didn't resist. Kieran pressed into his back, every inch of his frame taut with restraint. "This isn't the mating bond," he said. "This won't mark you. It won't claim you." His breath grazed Iskill's nape. "It's just a reminder." The first strap went over Iskill's wrists, pulling them forward, locking them to the grooves carved centuries ago. The second looped around his waist, anchoring him to the stone with cold ritual weight. A mock binding, a non-bonding, but it still tasted like possession. Kieran's hands moved with a familiarity he didn't know he had, down Iskill's arms, his ribs, his hips, learning him by feel, not name. His mouth hovered at the back of Iskill's neck. He didn't bite, but the pressure of teeth was there. A threat, promise, a test. And Iskill, he didn't speak. Not at first. He simply breathed, shallow, even, enduring, until the silence between them broke open like something sacred. "You're afraid," he whispered. Kieran froze. "You bring me here, chain me down like a ritual object, but you still don't mark me." Iskill tilted his head, throat arching in a way that would have been invitation in another context. But this wasn't invitation. It was truth. "You're afraid that once you do," he said, "you won't be Kieran anymore." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You'll be mine." Kieran let out a low sound, half laugh, half growl. Then he snapped. The collar leash tore from his wrist. His hand grabbed the back of Iskill's neck, shoving his face into the altar stone, not with cruelty, but with fury that couldn't find a language. "I could mark you right now," he hissed. "I could sink my teeth into your throat and make sure no one ever dares touch you again." Iskill didn't flinch. His voice was calm. "You won't." Kieran bared his teeth. He leaned in, his mouth pressed against the junction of throat and shoulder, lips brushing that vulnerable place. Then lower, breath, tongue, teeth. He sucked hard enough to bruise, just shy of piercing. Iskill hissed softly. Kieran's hands gripped the altar, one on each side of the Omega's hips. "Say it," he breathed. Iskill turned his head slightly. "Say what?" "Beg me to stop." Silence. Then, "No." The world tilted. Kieran's lips parted, breath ragged. His canines scraped skin. Just a breath. Just a heartbeat. He didn't bite. He pulled away with a snarl and slammed his palm into the altar instead, cracking the edge. Stone dust sprayed the air like ash. His chest heaved. Behind him, Iskill lay still, breathing evenly, eyes half-lidded. Not broken, not claimed, but not untouched either. That night, Kieran sat alone by the fire, knuckles bloodied, teeth still aching, and Iskill lay in the temple's far corner, the resonance collar pulsing low and steady, still lit, still bound. But he didn't sleep, because someone else had come. Not Kieran, not Sereth, a shadow, old, fast, Ishkur. He didn't speak in voice, only breath against thought. If he marks you, he ceases to be Kieran. The voice was wind and earth and rage and prophecy. He becomes me. Iskill sat up, heart hammering. Eshkur's spirit curled close, whispering along the edge of his blood. Let him love you, and he will be my vessel. Let him claim you, and I will rise through him. Iskill's hands went to the bite that hadn't happened. Not yet, but almost. He lay back against the stone, eyes open, heart pounding, and for the first time he truly feared being wanted. Chapter 14. When the Omega refused to kneel. The courtyard of the capital's high temple had never seen so many eyes. Stone columns lined the open sky, carved with symbols older than even the monarchy, wolves and moons, flames and chains. Between them, the citizens of Ravemarch pressed forward in rows, silent and expectant. At the center stood the altar of declaration, polished obsidian steps leading to the ceremonial platform where confessions were made. Oaths, sins, submissions, and on that platform stood Iskiel, unbound, unmarked, and still collared. Mavira stood at his side, flanked by 2 priests and 4 council witnesses in ceremonial armor. Her voice was calm, but the warning in her tone rang out like prophecy. "You will speak the words, Omega Valerian," she said. "You will state before the gods and the kingdom that your resonance with the Crown Alpha was never a bond, that it was an error, a misfire, nothing more." Iskiel stood very still. His hands were clasped before him. The chain still trailed from his collar, though no longer wrapped around Kieran's wrist. Kieran stood off the dais, 5 steps below, breath held, golden eyes dull with tension. His skin had not healed from their last encounter, and the mark across his chest pulsed red under his high-collared tunic, like something waiting to burst through. The crowd waited. Iskiel's lips parted, then closed. Mavira leaned closer. "This is mercy," she said, barely audible. "You get to leave. He gets to be prince. We get to keep the world from falling apart. All you have to do is kneel and say you failed." The silence broke under Iskiel's voice. "I did fail." The words echoed loud and clear across the temple walls. "I failed to surrender completely." Mavira's expression didn't change, but the council shifted. A few shoulders relaxed. Iskiel went on. "I failed to be the silent one." More murmurs from the crowd. "I failed to be harmless. I failed to be clean. I failed to be forgettable." Mavira stiffened. Kieran took a step forward. Iskiel's voice didn't rise, but it grew sharper. "And worst of all," he said, looking directly at Kieran now, "I failed to kneel when I was supposed to." The bond snapped, not physically, spiritually, like a wire pulled too tight, too long, too wrong. Kieran let out a choked sound. He staggered forward, hand flying to his chest. His knees hit the steps with a sharp thud. Blood spilled between his lips. The mark across his chest flared, violently, brilliantly, casting red light across his jaw and hands. The pain was raw, primal, not from injury, from rejection, from resonance. He coughed, doubling over. The guards reached for him, but he waved them off with a shaking hand, snarling low. Iskiel didn't flinch. He stared down at him from the altar. No anger, no triumph, just calm. "This is what it feels like," he said, "when the cage rattles back." Mavira stepped forward. Her hand gripped Iskiel's arm, hard, but the chain between his collar and Kieran's wrist reappeared in a flash of light, this time not bound by touch, but by something worse. Will. It shimmered in the space between them like a thread of blood and smoke. And then it wrapped around Kieran's throat instead. Only briefly, just enough to make his body shudder again, to force another gasp, another ripple of pain. The crowd cried out. One of the counselors shouted something about witchcraft, but Mavira only stared, and whispered, under her breath, "Double imprint." The words sank like a curse. "Impossible," one priest said. "No," she replied softly. "Unbreakable." Her gaze turned to Iskiel, calculating. "Unless one of them dies." Iskiel turned his face to the crowd, then to Kieran, then to the sky. He said nothing more, but he didn't kneel. Not for gods, not for princes, not even for the pain that twisted through his own veins now, echoing back what he'd just given. He only stood and waited for the world to catch up. Chapter 15: The Pleasure That Hurts the Crown. The war armor chamber was not made for ceremony. It was a room of leather and steel, of shaped gauntlets and oiled buckles. The walls hung with harnesses and restraint rigs that bore both purpose and threat. There was no candlelight here, only the muted hum of rune lamps and the low thrum of restraint enchantments waiting to be used. Kieran waited inside, bare to the waist. The collar of his undershirt clung to the sweat at the base of his throat. His chest flushed from more than exertion. He stood before the central armor frame, pieces of battle regalia laid out like sections of a beast, pauldrons, chestplate, greaves, all polished, sharpened, waiting. And he was burning. Again. Always. A knock came. He didn't answer. The door opened anyway. Iskill stepped in, silent as ever, collared, leashed in light, and walking straight into the fire. "You summoned me," he said. Kieran turned. His eyes flicked over Iskill from crown to collarbone. Slowly, purposefully. "I need assistance," he said. "With..." Kieran reached for the underframe of his armor, the section that wrapped around the ribs and lower spine. Thick leather, complex buckles. "Strap it for me." Iskill's jaw tensed, but he walked forward. He didn't ask why there were no stewards present. Didn't ask why the room smelled like alpha musk and burning restraint seals. Didn't ask why the air itself pulsed with tension. He stopped behind Kieran, where the backplate hung open. His fingers touched the leather. Kieran exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. "Higher," he said. "Tighter." Iskill adjusted the strap. The tips of his fingers brushed the scarred skin along Kieran's lower back. Kieran shivered. "You're doing this to me," he said softly. Iskill didn't respond. "You think I'm mad, but I'm not." Kieran's voice was close. "Too close. I'm just too hot. You made me this way." The last strap cinched tight with a sharp pull. But Kieran didn't step away. He leaned back, enough that his spine brushed Iskill's chest. Iskill froze. "You smell like the storm before it hits," Kieran murmured. "All salt and distance. All warning." One of Kieran's hands lifted, caught the wrist that had just buckled the armor, brought it forward until Iskill was pressed fully to his back, chest to shoulder blades, breath caught. Kieran guided the hand lower, slowly, down his stomach to the last strap near his hip. Iskill's breath hitched. Kieran turned his head, lips brushing the edge of Iskill's jaw. "Fasten it." Iskill did, hands trembling. "Your pulse is too loud," Kieran whispered. Iskill closed his eyes. "You can bite me," he said, voice almost steady. "But you can't mark me." The air snapped like leather. Kieran spun. Iskill's back hit the wall of the chamber, his shoulder blades landing against the padded rig, the scent of worn leather and sweat and need flooding around them like war drums. Kieran didn't touch him at first. He just hovered, the alpha's breath against Iskill's cheek. The heat of his body so close Iskill could feel the sting of suppressed want through the layers of fabric. Kieran's hands found the buckles at Iskill's waist. Tugged. Not enough to remove, just enough to threaten. "You think I want to mark you?" Kieran whispered. "You think I want to share my name?" His lips brushed the shell of Iskill's ear. "I want to hear you beg me not to." Iskill's knees buckled. He caught himself on the rig, but Kieran caught him too, hands at his hips, holding just hard enough to keep him upright. Information scent burst in the space between them. Iskill's vision blurred for a moment, the collar at his throat flaring with heat. But he didn't beg. He met Kieran's eyes. "You want to suffer for this," he said. Kieran's grip tightened. "I am suffering," he hissed. "And you love it." Their foreheads pressed together. Iskill whispered, "No, I endure it, because if I loved it, I'd be just like you." Kieran's mouth found his neck. Not with a kiss, with breath, with teeth. He scraped the curve between neck and collarbone, lips parting, one heartbeat from the mark. Iskill's hands fisted in his armor, and Kieran stopped, pulled back, shaking. He let go. turned away. Silence. Then, "I'll only bite you once," he said, voice hoarse, breaking. He faced the door, hand on the frame. "And it'll be when I don't want you anymore." He left the scent of restraint hanging in the air behind him like smoke after a battlefield. Iskil didn't move for a long time, but his fingers rose, gently touching the place Kieran's teeth had hovered. The skin burned, not from contact, from absence. Chapter 16, The Alpha Who Lost His Name. It began with water, still, black, endless. Kieran stood at the edge of the well. No wind, no stars above, just the ring of ancient stone, laced with runes so old they no longer spoke words, only memory. The well wasn't new, nor forgotten. It was buried. He didn't remember how he got here, only that he'd been walking in the dream for what felt like hours, barefoot, armorless, blood still crusted beneath his fingernails from battles long past or yet to come. The water called. He looked down, saw nothing, then saw everything. A flash of teeth, of moons burning, of Iskil, bound and trembling, eyes glazed not from fear, but memory, of himself, arms painted with fire, dragging a crown made of bone. Then a voice, his voice, but older, deeper, not his. "You never had a name." Kieran turned, and saw himself, but not. The reflection stepped forward from the water's edge. Ishkur. He wore Kieran's face, but longer-haired, crueler in the mouth, pupils a ring of black and silver. No reflection of soul in those eyes, only history. "You took my mark like breath," Ishkur said. "You dreamed of him before you met him. You screamed his name before you had a throat." Kieran's chest constricted. "You're a myth. I was. Now I'm memory." Ishkur reached out. His fingers hovered near Kieran's temple. "Look." Kieran couldn't stop him. And then he saw the throne room that no longer existed. The high court in ruins. Ishkur in full armor, dragging a blood-bound Omega across shattered stone. Howling as priests fell around him like rain. Saw Ishkur mark him, and then saw Ishkur break. "I loved him," Ishkur whispered. The image shifted. The Omega's body lay limp. The bond shattered mid-bite. The scar on Ishkur's throat burned with blue fire. "I was told we were meant, that the bond was prophecy." He looked Kieran in the eye. "And so are you." Kieran stumbled back. "No." Ishkur followed. "Yes. You're dead. Not dead. Waiting." The world twisted. The stars above turned red. "You are my next verse," Ishkur said. "You are me and he." He pointed to the image of Iskil bound on the ruined altar. "Is the same sacrificial line. The gods repeat what works." Kieran shook his head. "I choose him." Ishkur smiled. "It was not kind." "So did I." He woke gasping. The ceiling above him was the vaulted chamber of his private quarters, embroidered with gold and obsidian lines. His chest was damp with sweat, fists clenched around the edge of the furs tangled around him, and pain. His forehead burned. He reached up, felt the heat, the pattern, not a fever, an etching. He rolled to sit upright and found Iskil, silent, curled beside the bed, still dressed in the same tunic from the prior day, hair mussed, the resonance collar still pulsing faintly. He hadn't left, hadn't said a word. But the moment Kieran moved, Iskil stirred, eyes opening slowly. They didn't speak, but something deeper moved between them. Kieran reached out, hand shaking. Iskil didn't flinch. He leaned in, rested his head in Kieran's palm, and just breathed. The contact was light, but it shattered Kieran's last wall. He bent forward, pressing his forehead to Iskil's. "I'm not who I was," he whispered. "I'm not even sure I'm me anymore." Iskil closed his eyes. "Then be something new." Kieran shook. "The bond isn't the problem," Iskil said softly. He lifted his own hand, placed it over Kieran's chest, right above where the mark had started burning again. The silence was. Kieran swallowed. Hard. He could feel it now. Not the bond. Not the need. The fear. The knowledge that the more he wanted Iskill, the more he stopped being Kieran of Ravemarch, and started becoming the echo of a dead alpha who had once burned the world for a mate. Ishkar. A ghost in his blood. But still Iskill was here. Not kneeling. Not fleeing. Just with him. And it hurt. Gods, it hurt. Because he didn't know if he was capable of love. Only need. And worse, he didn't know if that was still him. Later, long after Iskill had drifted into half-sleep again with his head on Kieran's chest, the voice returned. Soft. Wet. Like a whisper in a grave. You can kiss him. Eshkar's voice. You can love him. But you will kill him. Just like I did. Chapter 17. His voice made me bleed. The council chamber was choking on its own order. 12 high-backed thrones circled the obsidian flame of the central seal, and the air was thick with incense and power plays. The voices that rang out were carefully modulated, too practiced to be sincere, too sharp to be ignored. Except one. Kieran hadn't spoken for most of the session. He sat on the dais like a statue carved from fury and exhaustion, the collar of his robe too tight, the weight of his title grinding into the marks on his skin that hadn't healed. The rune across his forehead, Eshkar's scar, had not faded. If anything, it had deepened. Every time he blinked, he saw too much, and every time he tried to breathe, he tasted the bond. Not the taste of Iskill's skin, not the scent of his sweat or the salt of his breath, but the echo of it, the absence. You haven't signed the peace writ, one of the silver-robed counselors said. Kieran didn't answer. You refused to declare your intent for the Crescent Rebellion. Still, he did not speak. Finally, Mavira stood. Her veil fluttered slightly as she stepped into the ring of judgment. We have been more than lenient with your state, she said. But a ruler whose blood responds to ghosts cannot lead the living. That did it. Kieran's hand moved. Just one. It rose to his mouth, brushing his bottom lip. Then, he laughed. Quietly, then louder, until the echo of it drowned out even the crackle of the central flame. You think I'm mad? He asked. Look at you, a younger counselor spat. You bear the mark of a dead alpha. You speak to walls. You forget your own orders. You! Kieran's head snapped up. The gold in his eyes was gone. Only silver, bright and wrong. He stood, one step forward. The chamber shook. And then, bring me Iskill. The command wasn't loud, but it carried, not with sound, with force. It shot through the stone of the palace, through the chambers and towers and walls. It pulsed like an organ strike, vibrating through marble, fire, bone. And far below, in the west wing of the Royal Medical Tower, Iskill screamed. He had been standing, reading, breathing, and then he wasn't. Blood poured from his mouth, hot and sudden, splashing down his front. His knees buckled. The collar at his throat flared in defense. But it wasn't enough. Not against that voice. Sereth was there in an instant, catching him before he hit the floor. Breathe, the guard whispered. Gods, breathe. Iskill gasped through a mouthful of copper. Don't, he coughed. Don't let him speak like that again. But even as he said it, his body trembled. Not in fear, in response. Because that voice, the command, had found the buried chain between them. And yanked. By the time Sereth reached the throne hall, Iskill in his arms, the flames in the center seal had flared white. Kieran stood at the edge, hands bloodied from where he'd gripped the marble too tight. His eyes widened the moment he saw Iskill, saw the blood. He staggered forward. Sereth tried to block him, then stopped. Because Kieran didn't attack. He fell to his knees. Hands trembling, he reached out. Iskill, barely conscious, let his head rest against Kieran's palm. Kieran cradled him like a thing both sacred and doomed. "What did I do?" he whispered. Iskil's lips were cracked. His voice was raw. "You remembered me," he rasped. "But only when I hurt." Kieran shook. "I didn't mean." "Yes," Iskil said. "You did." He coughed again, blood streaking his jaw. Kieran wiped it with his thumb. "I didn't know it would pull you so hard." "Then you don't know what this bond is." Kieran leaned in, pressing his forehead to Iskil's. "Tell me," he whispered. "Are you my poison?" Iskil's breath ghosted across his cheek. He didn't answer, but far away in the shadow between worlds, Ashkur did. "He is your cure," the voice murmured. "And your chain." Chapter 18, The Flesh That Ruined Me. The old meditation tower had been long forgotten by the royal stewards. Once a sanctuary for alpha heirs to train restraint and resonance control, it now stood half swallowed by vines and silence, buried behind layers of shuttered windows and stone tapestries no one had touched in decades. Kieran had the keys. Of course he did. Iskil followed him up the spiral stairs in silence. The air grew colder the higher they climbed, and thinner, like even the gods had grown wary of breathing too deeply here. When they reached the final chamber, Kieran opened the door without a word. Inside, the floor was shaped like a shallow basin, ringed with concentric sigils of old ink and dried sanctum water. In the center, a low marble platform waited. Smooth, clean. "Here," Kieran said, stepping barefoot into the resonance basin. "This is where the old princes came to calm the wolf. Before battles. Before bonding." Iskil stood at the threshold. He didn't move. "This is how you calm yourself?" he asked softly. Kieran looked over his shoulder. His eyes were already half-lit. "Not gold. Not silver. Red. I haven't been calm since you breathed me in." He held out a hand. Iskil took a slow step forward. The door closed behind him. They stood facing each other inside the circle, barefoot, breath visible in the cold. Kieran reached for the small vial on the pedestal and poured a line of translucent liquid across the edge of the platform. Holy water, memory-tinted. It shimmered under their feet, activating the resonance runes etched into the marble. The glow crawled up their calves, their chests, their nerves. "This isn't sanctioned," Iskil said, voice tight. "No," Kieran replied. "It's not." Then he stepped forward. One hand slid behind Iskil's back. The other cupped his jaw. Their bodies aligned without space. And the resonance began. It wasn't fire. It wasn't even pain. It was clarity. Every breath shared. Every flutter of thought mirrored between them. A flicker in one body echoed in the other. A heat in the chest spread lower, pooling into hunger neither of them voiced. Iskil gripped Kieran's wrist without meaning to. His knees weakened. Kieran's hand didn't move, only held. He spoke against Iskil's skin. "Let me feel you." "You already do," Iskil gasped. But Kieran wasn't asking. He shifted, slow, deliberate, so that every part of their chests aligned. And then, with a groan half-beast, half-prince, he sank his teeth, not hard, into the curve of Iskil's collarbone. Not a mark, not a claim, but the shape of it was enough to set fire through both of them. Iskil's body jerked. "Kieran," he breathed. "Stop." He said it again, and again, but he didn't move away. Kieran's hands slid down his sides, gripping his hips like anchors. Their foreheads touched. Their breath merged. "I can't," Kieran growled. "You made me like this. You're burning. I want to lose. I want to give in. But I know the moment I mark you, I disappear." "Then don't," Iskil whispered. "Don't disappear." Their hearts slammed together in one rhythm. One body between two fates. Kieran pulled back slightly, lips flushed, pupils blown wide. Iskil met his gaze. You're afraid, he said. Terrified. You could destroy me. I would destroy everything. Then why bring me here? Kieran pressed his lips to Iskil's throat. Gentle this time, like a man asking for the thing he couldn't have. Iskil trembled, then lifted his hand, guided Kieran's face to his palm. Then take this, he said. Just this. Kieran obeyed. His lips kissed the center of Iskil's hand. Soft, devout. Then he leaned in close again, eyes fevered, voice breaking. I'll never survive you, he whispered. You already haven't, Iskil replied, and Kieran's knees hit the floor like a confession. Far below, in the deeper dark where broken thrones remembered their kings, something stirred. Ishkur smiled, and whispered to no one at all. He was made to kneel, but not to pray. Chapter 19. The mark was meant to kill me. The Black Tower had no name, not on maps, not in archives. It rose from the western cliffs like a spine thrust from the earth, tall, narrow, built from obsidian too dark to reflect light. The air around it hung heavy, hushed, as if even the birds knew to steer clear. Mavira led him there. No guards, no acolytes, only her. Iskil walked behind her in silence, his collar still glowing faintly with the suppressor rune. He didn't ask questions. He didn't protest. Something in him had already gone still the moment she told him they were going to the true word below. He knew. Not everything, but enough. The moment the tower door opened, the scent hit him. Damp stone, old blood, and something older. The stone whispered as they walked. Not with voices, with memory. She said nothing until they reached the core. A wide, circular chamber spiraling downward like a well. The walls glowed with rows of inscriptions, names, sigils, death marks. Hundreds, thousands, all burned into stone in fading red. Do you know what this is? Mavira asked. Iskil looked up. The ledger of failures, he said softly. She turned to him. No, not failures. Sacrifices. He didn't speak. The church never told you everything, she said. Of course not. You were designed for obedience. She walked to the wall, laid her palm on a particular glyph. Its lines curved like the binding rune etched into Kieran's chest. Then she gestured. He stepped forward and read the name beneath it. Iskil Valerian. Date of inscription. 23 years ago. He stared at it. I wasn't born then. No, Mavira said. You were made. He looked at her sharply. And that's when the light shifted. Not from the wall. From behind him. He turned, and Ishkur was standing there. Not in dream. Not in echo. Real. Human-shaped. His eyes were mirrors. His presence bled gravity. He wore the face of a wolf too long caged inside skin. Hello again, he said. Iskil stumbled back. Mavira didn't move. Ishkur approached slowly. You're here to understand, he said. So I'll give you truth. He reached toward the wall and touched the glyph beneath Iskil's name. The stone responded, flaring, humming, and opening. The chamber behind the wall parted like a wound, revealing a second room, a smaller shrine. At its center, a broken altar. A heart stone sat on it, fractured, still pulsing faintly. Ishkur stepped beside it. This is the first markstone, he said, where the binding system was born. You think the imprint is sacred? You think it's love? His smile twisted. No, it was never about love. It was about control. He turned to face Iskil fully now. You weren't made to be cherished, he said. You were made to be endured. Iskil's breath caught. Ishkur pointed to the glowing rune on his collarbone. Your body carries an echo of my mind. A fragment. A failsafe. Mavira finally spoke again. Every alpha meant to take the crown must first be matched to a vessel. One that can absorb his madness. Iskil whispered, You made me a cage. Ishkur nodded. Your softness, your silence, your scent. It was all designed to keep him from losing control. Iskil took a step back. You lied. No, Ishkur said gently. I warned you. His voice dropped, rich and cutting. You're not his equal, Iskil. You're his containment, his anchor, his leash. Iskil shook his head. He wants me. Ishkur stepped closer. Yes, because he was bred to. You were made to soothe, to tempt, to break just enough to keep him sharp. The words landed like teeth in flesh. Iskil pressed his back to the cold wall. And what if I stop? He whispered. What if I stop holding him together? Ishkur's expression was unreadable. Then he becomes me. There was no warmth in the chamber now. The runes dimmed. The silence deepened. Iskil's eyes stung. All the touches, the confessions, the restraint, the not quite kisses, the worship disguised as violence. None of it had been about him, only about what he was designed to do. He slid down the wall slowly, sat with knees drawn up. His throat burned. Ishkur crouched in front of him. You feel betrayed, he said. Iskil nodded. Ishkur tilted his head. But would you rather be useless? Iskil didn't answer. You kept him sane, Ishkur said. You made him beautiful. But if you truly love him, you'll set him free. His voice softened. Closer now. At the shell of Iskil's ear. Die and he gets the throne. The kingdom. His mind. He paused. Live. And he loses all three. Iskil's fingers clenched. Ishkur smiled. And whispered the last truth. The mark was never meant to bind you. It was meant to break you. In the dark, alone, Iskil let himself cry, for the first time since childhood. And far away in the palace tower, Kiran bolted upright in bed, his own name no longer burning on his tongue. Only one word, Iskil. Chapter 20, The Bite That Should Have Saved Him. The palace burned without fire. Not in flame, but in howl, in the shattering of doors and the screaming of guards who could not stand against a prince who had stopped pretending to be human. Kiran's fist slammed through the final seal of the northern gate, ancient runes cracking under his pulse. The blood on his jaw wasn't his. The cuts on his knuckles didn't slow him. The wolf beneath his skin had risen, and it wanted one thing. Him. Iskil. He didn't speak. He didn't pause. He ran through corridors lined with frightened priests, overturned altars, scattered incense bowls still smoking from false prayers. The farther he went, the more the palace seemed to recoil from him, like the building knew its master was unraveling. Then came the tower, the black tower, and the locked gate that led to the forbidden heart of the sanctuary. Sareth stood before it, sword drawn, eyes wide. Kiran, move. Kiran, listen to me. He's not. Move. Sareth hesitated. That cost him. Kiran struck the hilt of the sword, sent it flying, and shoved his old friend into the stone. Not enough to kill, just enough to make him vanish from the moment. Then he pushed through the doors, and saw him, Iskil, kneeling in the center of the moon ring, arms limp at his sides, the collar still glowing dimly at his throat, breath shallow. But he looked up the moment Kiran stepped in, and something inside the alpha broke. He crossed the distance in 5 strides, dropped to his knees. His hands trembled as he reached for him, palms to shoulders, shoulder to back, body curling around the curled figure before him like armor made of breath. Iskil, he rasped. Iskil shivered, but did not recoil. Kiran pulled him up, dragged him bodily to the heart of the ceremonial ring, where old bonds were sealed and sacred oaths meant to last centuries had once been spoken. He pressed him there, not with violence, but with something so raw it might have been mercy. And then he whispered, "Let me mark you." Iskil didn't move. "If I mark you," Kiran said, "you'll belong to me. Fully. You'll anchor me. I won't lose myself. Not to Ishkur. Not to madness. Please. Iskil's eyes fluttered closed. A tear slid down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. You think marking me will save you, he whispered. I know it will. No, Iskil said, voice trembling. It'll destroy you. His hands rose, one to Kieran's chest, the other to the back of his neck. Your soul, it'll fall into him, into Ishkur's hollow. You mark me, and you finish what he started. Silence. Kieran's breath hitched, but he didn't move. Not away. Not yet. Iskil opened his eyes again, and then he tilted his head, exposing the pale line of his neck, the curve of surrender, the place where teeth were meant to end wars. Then bite me, he said softly. If you have to fall, he whispered. I'll fall with you. Kieran's mouth opened. His breath was fire. His hands shook, and he leaned in, lips brushing skin, a growl in his throat. One press, one drag of teeth, one heartbeat. Then he stopped. Everything in him screamed to claim, to own, to make the pain stop. But something else, something buried in the part of him that was still boy, still prince, still Kieran, held fast. He pulled away and wept, not loud, not broken, just a single tear against the curve of Iskil's throat. I won't do it, he said. Iskil's hands clenched. Why? Kieran cupped his face. Because this time, he whispered. I'm not asking you to be my cage. He stood, staggered back, but he didn't leave. He watched as Iskil's head dropped again, dark hair falling forward, the moonlight catching on the collar still holding them apart. Kieran's voice broke the silence. I won't bite you. His hand clenched at his side. I want you to ask me. He turned to go, and just before the door closed behind him, Iskil lifted his head and smiled, cold, sharp, a thing born of too many wounds wrapped in lace. Then you better prepare, my prince, he said softly, to hear me beg for it. Chapter 21 The Wolf Who Knelt to No One. The council hall had not known silence in 100 years. Not since the civil brand wars. Not since the last king was dragged from the throne by his own brothers and made to bleed out across the steps of the judgment dais. Today it was silent, because Kieran Ravemarch stood at its center. And he was not speaking. The judgment banners hung above him, red and gold, fluttering without wind. The old laws had been read aloud, the accusations written into flame. 12 counselors, Mavira among them, an audience of nobles, generals, acolytes, everyone who mattered in the kingdom of the wolves. They wanted his crown, or his soul, maybe both. Mavira stood with her hands folded, face hidden by a ceremonial veil. Prince Kieran, she intoned, the court finds you unfit to command. You have failed to master your bond. Your resonance is unstable. You are a danger to the throne and the bloodline. You will either sever your imprint today, or surrender your claim. A pause. Then the blade was raised, held aloft by the chamber's executioner of vows. The rune dagger that severs mental chains, carves away resonance, destroys the soul link between Alpha and Omega. No one moved. Then came the voice. I will not sever the bond. Kieran's voice was clear, low, controlled. The room held its breath. He reached for the blade, but not to touch it, only to push it aside. The executioner's hand hesitated. Kieran, Mavira said, her voice a quiet threat. You defy the will? He turned his head, but not to her, to the back of the chamber, where a figure stood, unmoving, cloaked in silence. Iskil. His collar still shimmered faintly. His wrists bore the marks of chains long gone. His expression was unreadable. Kieran stepped from the dais, walked down the center of the hall, past the watchers, past the elders, past every noble and priest who had spent years trying to kneel the Wolf Prince. and stopped before Iskill. Then, he went down on one knee. The gasps weren't from the court. They were from history itself. Because Kieran Ravemarch had never knelt. Not to gods. Not to thrones. Not even to war. "I don't kneel for kingdoms," he said, voice low. "I don't kneel for council, for bloodline, or for the rules written by corpses." He looked up, into Iskill's eyes. "I kneel for you." The silence that followed wasn't silence. It was breathlessness, the kind that comes before something shatters. But Iskill didn't smile, didn't cry, didn't reach out his hand like stories say a mate should. He moved, fast, and kicked Kieran square in the chest, hard enough to knock him back onto the marble floor. The crowd roared in shock. Kieran didn't rise. He only stared up at him, eyes wide, not with pain, but with understanding. Because Iskill stepped forward. His voice was quiet, cold. "Do you think I want your kneeling?" Kieran opened his mouth. Iskill didn't let him answer. "I don't care if you crawl to me in front of kings or strip your name bare in front of gods. I don't care about crowns. Or gestures." He stepped closer. The whole court stared as the Omega leaned over the Alpha. "I will not accept you," he whispered, "until I know that when you stand beside me, you're not bleeding madness beneath your ribs." Kieran swallowed hard. "I?" Iskill's hand hovered above his chest. Not touching, just hovering. "You want to belong to me?" he asked. "I already do." "Then prove it." He stepped back. "Stand up," he said. "But not as a prince." Kieran pushed himself upright. "Stand up as the man who won't break me when the wolf in him wakes." The silence cracked. So did something inside Kieran. But he stood. No longer for show. No longer for power. For him. Far away. Deep beneath the moonwell. Ishkur opened his eyes. And black blood began to rise in the waters. He smiled. "They've chosen their war," he murmured. Then he lifted a single hand toward the surface. "Now," he said, "let's see who survives it." Chapter 22, The Fever That Ruined the Crown. The Forbidden Wing had been sealed for over a century. No light entered the stone halls, and no sound escaped them. The flame chamber at its heart, once used for burning out the madness in wolves who rose too fast, too strong, had not been entered since the time of the second collapse. Until tonight. Sereth stood outside the arched door, jaw clenched, his palm resting on the carved sigil etched deep into the iron. "He won't recognize you," he said. Iskill did not reply. "He's not wearing anything," Sereth added, quieter now. "He tore the last layer of armor off his own back." Still, Iskill said nothing. So Sereth lowered his head and moved aside. "You'll have 10 minutes, he muttered. "After that, the Alpha Guard will force an entry. Even if it kills him." Iskill walked through the doorway and into hell. The heat hit him first. Thick, oppressive, and laced with something that wasn't just fire. The air was heavy with the sharp scent of silver blood and the acrid residue of scorched fur. Rune seals pulsed along the walls, cracked and flickering like candles burning themselves out. And in the center of it all, Kieran. He was curled on the stone slab at the heart of the chamber, naked, skin flushed with the high glow of fevered resonance. His claws were half-shifted, digging into his own thighs and chest, leaving red welts down his ribs. His breathing was ragged, unfocused. He didn't even lift his head. Until Iskill stepped closer. That was when the Alpha stirred. Not with a howl, with a whimper. Low, broken, animal. Kieran's nostrils flared. His spine arched, and he looked up, eyes flashing wild. Not gold, not red, but the burning gray of something halfway between man and beast. Iskill. The name was barely sound. It was breath, instinct. Iskill dropped the satchel he carried, unclasped his outer robe, stepped closer. "Kieran," he said, voice calm, stripped bare of emotion. "Don't move." But Kieran was already shifting, panting, crawling toward him across the stone like a wounded animal drawn to water. His claws scraped tile. His lips moved without sense. "I'm going to pin you," Iskill said, stepping into the shallow ring of moon-forged chains that encircled the slab. Kieran reached for him. Iskill shoved him back down. With precision, with purpose. He straddled Kieran's hips, pressing down hard with his knees, gripping both wrists and forcing them above Kieran's head into the old steel rings still embedded in the slab's edges. They locked with a click that echoed like judgment. Kieran didn't resist. He couldn't. He arched, once, then collapsed fully back, chest heaving, sweat slicking his skin like molten glass. Iskill bent forward and whispered, "Breathe." The scent between them shifted. Iskill's scent, sharp, bittersweet, laced with command, spread across the stone. Kieran's body reacted instantly. His hips bucked. His throat let out a sound between a groan and a snarl. Iskill pressed both palms to his chest, held him still, then slid one palm lower, to the center of his ribs, where the mark pulsed wild and fractured. He lowered himself until their skin touched completely, chest to chest, heart to heart. Kieran howled. Iskill didn't flinch. He tilted his head, exposing his own throat for half a second, letting Kieran see what he would never fully have. Then he leaned in and pressed his lips to Kieran's jaw. "You want to burn?" he whispered. "Then burn beneath me." Kieran thrashed, but not to escape, to feel, to submit, and so Iskill gave it to him. Their bodies aligned again and again in slow, tight motion, not for pleasure, but for control. Every movement was a claim without completion. Every contact a fire without flame. The resonance between them reached fever pitch. Their skin steamed. The chamber pulsed. Kieran's voice broke. "Mark me," he begged. "No. Please." "I said no." Kieran sobbed. Tears, hot and silent, spilled down the side of his face. Iskill kissed them away, but not gently, like punishment. "You only want me when you're breaking," he said. "I only feel you when I'm dying," Kieran gasped. They stayed locked together until the runes along the walls cooled from red to white, until the light stopped flickering, until the pulse between them found its rhythm again. Kieran collapsed entirely, eyes glassy, voice thin. "If you ever leave." "I won't," Iskill said, too quickly. Kieran shook his head. "No. If you ever leave." His throat hitched and he swallowed blood. "I'll kill every living thing between me and your name." At the edge of the sealed door, Sereth turned away from the sound of moans and chains. He didn't go in, didn't listen long, but he heard enough to know that tonight, the Alpha wasn't ruling anything, and the Omega wasn't kneeling anymore. Chapter 23, I am the cage, you are the beast. The old tower had never been meant for prayers. It stood behind the southern walls of the church stronghold, forgotten by most except those who remembered how the Order once purged minds, not bodies. Its bricks were thick with ghost light and regret. No birds nested in its broken eaves. No insects crawled near its base. The wind avoided it. Mavira led the way. Her veil did not flutter. Her feet made no sound. Iskill followed, silent. He had not asked why. He already knew. The closer they came, the more the ache in his mark flared. The bond that curled between him and Kieran, usually a thread of heat or longing, now throbbed like a bruise. Something inside it had twisted. They reached the mirror altar at the tower's heart. It was not made of glass. It was liquid, still as death, trapped in a shallow stone basin rimmed with old runes. It reflected nothing of the present, only the truth behind it. Mavira placed one hand on the edge. "Iskill Valerian," she said. "The time has come." He waited. The bond has entered inverse lock phase. He is breaking. not outwardly but within. The beast in him no longer obeys. She turned to face him. And it will no longer recognize you. The words landed like iron. Unless you end the mark, she said. Completely. Before the next full rise. He could barely breathe. Mavira stepped back. Step into it, she said. Initiate the disjunction rite. Purge him from your spirit. He looked down at the mirror altar and stepped in. There was no sound, no fall, only entry, like sliding beneath skin into bone. Iskill opened his eyes inside a chamber of light and rot. This was not the dream space, not the bond. This was the core, Kieran's spirit well, the center of the imprint, and it was rotting. Cracked marble tiles spread out in spirals. Broken weapons littered the floor. Shattered mirrors hung in midair, each showing images of Kieran's memories. Him laughing, kneeling, crying, killing. In the center was a throne, and someone sat on it. Not Kieran. Ishkur. In full form now. No longer a reflection. No longer a whisper. He was real. Tall, angular, the same features as Kieran but twisted, longer, sharper, crueler. His smile was not one of welcome. It was hunger. I was wondering when you'd come, he said. Iskill couldn't speak. Ishkur stood, barefoot, bare-chested. The symbol of the failed mark burned across his sternum, pulsing slowly. You think you're here to save him? Ishkur said, voice soft and smooth. You're not. He stepped forward. You're here because you bound him. You opened the door. You made me a path. Iskill shook his head. I never. You did, Ishkur said. When you chose him. When you whispered his name in the dark and let him into your spirit. When you told yourself surrender was love. He reached out. The air around him stilled. Ishkur's fingers hovered above Iskill's chest. Every time he touched you, he murmured. He became more mine. Iskill's lips parted. No. Yes, Ishkur said, because the imprint was never about love. It was a key. You were forged to be a lock. He leaned in and whispered in his ear. I am not invading him. He is becoming me. The words cut sharper than blades. Iskill staggered back. Ishkur didn't follow. He gestured behind him, and the image changed. Now the throne showed Kieran, his body kneeling before a mirror, his face blank, his eyes gone. Ishkur smiled. He's almost ready, he said. One more step, one more taste, one more mark. Iskill's knees buckled. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. And then, Ishkur stepped close again, lifted one finger, pressed it slowly to the center of Iskill's forehead. You have a choice, he said. His voice no longer echoed like a man. It rang like a command. Kill me. His smile widened. Or let him kill you. Iskill shuddered. He wanted to scream, to break, but he said nothing. And that silence, Ishkur devoured it. That's what I love most about you, he said. You always obey, even when you bleed. Outside the mirror altar, Mavira stood unmoving. She could not hear what passed within, but her hands trembled, because the surface of the mirror had begun to bleed. Chapter 24. Let me be the one who breaks you. The silent corridor of the West Tower was meant for meditation. The stone walls absorbed sound. No echo, no voice. A place where monks and generals once whispered to gods, hoping not to hear them answer. Tonight it thundered, with boots, with broken chains, with the sound of a prince losing his last restraint. Kieran had already destroyed the seals at the iron gates. The guards sent to intercept him now lay unconscious, or worse, behind him, their weapons twisted, their bones not quite aligned with their armor. He didn't care. His breath came shallow, hot, his claws half-shifted. The wolf behind his eyes howled louder than his thoughts. They had locked him away, because he was too close. They had kept Iskill from him, Because they knew. They knew what would happen if he touched him again. What he might become. What he might choose. He slammed his palm against the final door, burning the ward's seal from its center. The corridor beyond was cold. Iskiel stood at the far end, framed by a broken window and a shaft of moonlight. He didn't flinch, didn't retreat. He simply turned his head as the door exploded inward. "You disobeyed the council," he said quietly. Kieran didn't stop walking. "You disobeyed me." Iskiel's gaze flicked to the blood on his hands. "I warned them not to cage you." Kieran stopped a breath away. His voice cracked. "I begged them." He reached out, fist clenched, and slammed it into the pillar beside Iskiel's head, stone fracturing under the impact. "I begged you." Iskiel didn't blink. "You begged me to kneel." Kieran growled low in his throat. "I begged you to let me save you." He pressed forward, chest to chest, until Iskiel's back was pinned against the stone. His hands gripped Iskiel's wrists, not tight, but unchosen. Their foreheads touched. The heat between them surged like a second heartbeat. "I could mark you," Kieran said. His voice was raw. "Right now. One bite. One press. You'd be mine. Fully. No one could touch you. No one could command you. I would kill the gods before they reached you." Iskiel tilted his head. A slow smile, more sorrow than triumph, touched his lips. "You really think the bite would save us?" Kieran's hands trembled. "I know it would." Iskiel's breath hitched. Then he leaned forward, his throat brushing Kieran's cheek, his mouth near his ear. "If you mark me," he whispered, "you're gone. I've seen it. That bite won't protect me. It'll complete him." He pulled back just enough to meet Kieran's eyes. "You'll stop being you." Kieran shuddered. The wolf inside him writhed. "You think I care?" Iskiel lifted his chin and said the most dangerous thing he could. "Then do it." That broke something. Kieran snapped. He spun Iskiel around, shoved him against the pillar, his body pressing hard into his back, breath hot against the crook of his neck. His scent flooded the corridor. Alpha need, alpha possession, alpha madness. Iskiel gasped, but didn't fight, because he knew this wasn't Kieran. This was the edge, and it wanted to see who would jump first. Kieran's mouth pressed to his neck. His teeth grazed skin. The bond between them flared, white hot, twisting like a cord of light trying to strangle itself. "You really want to be mine?" Kieran whispered. "You want me to rip the last of my mind apart and bury it in your skin?" Iskiel didn't answer. He only let his head fall back onto Kieran's shoulder. "Surrender without submission. Then break me," he said. "Break me like you swore you never would." Kieran's growl was a sob. He opened his mouth. His teeth grazed, pressed, then stopped. His entire body locked. His lips trembled, and instead of sinking in, he turned his mouth just slightly and kissed the skin instead. A breath, a heartbeat, then another. He drew back, forehead pressed to the nape of Iskiel's neck. "I can't," he whispered. "I won't." Tears spilled down his face. "You'll die." Iskiel turned slowly, still pinned between his arms, their chests rising in the same rhythm. He met Kieran's gaze. "I already am." Kieran's knees hit the floor. He wrapped his arms around Iskiel's waist and pressed his face to the curve of his stomach. Silent, trembling, ashamed, and above them, beyond the broken glass of the corridor's end, Ishkur watched, smiling, because he knew what Kieran didn't. The wolf who chose mercy would always lose. Chapter 25, The Pact of Blood and Echoes. The descent into the well of fractured marks was not made with torches. Light did not belong here. It was a wound buried beneath the foundations of the palace, a place spoken of only in failed prayers and half-burned scriptures. No map led to it. No ward could seal it, because the pain below was older than architecture. older than gods. Iskill stepped barefoot into the mouth of the ruin. Behind him, Sereth waited, silent, armed, unwilling to stop him but unable to follow. "You shouldn't be the one to do this," Sereth had said. Iskill had only looked at him once, a faint smile curving his lips like frost across glass. "I was made for nothing else." The chamber spread in rings, 12 concentric circles carved in bone-white stone, each one filled with ash, salt, and the dried blood of nameless Omegas long dead. The center of the well was a hollow bowl, no wider than a throne, no deeper than a coffin. Kieran was already waiting there, unmoving, eyes closed. He had come when Iskill summoned him, not with force, but with resonance. The imprint had drawn him like gravity. Iskill stepped over the runes. His steps were soundless. He wore no robes, no seal, only the threads of memory between them and the ache in his chest like a blade turned inward. He knelt in front of the Alpha. Kieran opened his eyes. "You called me. I need you. You have me." Iskill's hands trembled slightly as he reached forward and placed both palms over Kieran's heart. "You won't for long." Kieran frowned. "What are you talking about?" But Iskill was already lowering his forehead to Kieran's. "We're going to finish this," he whispered. "Together." And then he breathed, not air, but echo. Their spirits collided inside the circle. The resonance was instant. It shattered the silence like glass cracking under heat. The rings around them lit, not with flame, but with memory. Every scar they shared, every unspoken ache, every restraint and refusal, they blazed between their bodies now like constellations being torn from the sky. Kieran gasped. Iskill leaned in further, pressing his chest fully to Kieran's, pinning his wrists to the stone, and opened the imprint fully. Kieran roared, voice cracking, body arching. "Stop!" Iskill didn't. He reached back, pulled the ceremonial blade from his belt, and cut a line across his throat, just shallow enough, just deep enough. Blood spilled, slow, silver-tinged, not human, and it fell into Kieran's mouth. The mark ignited. Kieran screamed. The chamber howled with it. The rune rings pulsed. The mirror of the soul, the imprint, was pulled wide open, and through it, Ishkur came. The moment his presence touched the edge of the ritual, everything shattered. Kieran's body seized. His spine bent backwards unnaturally, veins glowing black beneath his skin. His mouth opened in a soundless scream as his soul was split, one half dragged forward by love, the other hollowed by Ishkur's hunger. Iskill's blood fell across Kieran's chest, soaking the mark. And Ishkur entered. Not a shadow, not a whisper, a form. A snarl broke through the veil. A body stepped through, not Kieran's, but not entirely separate either. Ishkur stood inside Kieran's mind, smiling. "Finally," he whispered. "No more interruptions." He looked down at Iskill, now on hands and knees, choking, breath shallow, blood staining his lips. "You did well, little lamb," Ishkur said, voice smooth as oil. "You opened the gate wide enough for two." Kieran's mouth moved, but it wasn't him. "You're beautiful when you break." Iskill forced himself up. His vision blurred, but he focused. "You wanted inside," he whispered. "Now you're stuck." Ishkur tilted his head. "What?" "You're bound to the vessel I marked, not the one you made. And now that I've finished the imprint," Iskill smiled faintly, even as blood ran down his neck. "You have to share," Ishkur snarled. And inside Kieran's eyes, for one brief moment, golden light flickered. Real. Alive. Kieran clawed his way forward in his own body, fighting the possession. Ishkur roared, grabbing his skull from the inside. "I will rip your mind in half. You'll have to find which half still wants you," Iskill whispered. He collapsed fully, breath shallow. Behind him, the rune rings cracked, and Kieran, what remained of him, opened his eyes. One was gold. One was black. Ishkur had entered, but the door had not fully closed. Not yet. Far above the ruins, the sky cracked in half, and the moon began to bleed. Chapter 26 The Crown Begs, the Wolf Bites. The gods had once been worshipped in the grand theater of Valenhall. Now they watched in silence. Every marble pillar had been lit with ceremonial fire. Every tiered seat was filled, nobles, generals, clergy, even surviving council elders, all summoned to witness the long-awaited crowning of the Ravemarch bloodline's final heir. The throne stood raised beneath the fractured sigil of the moon. But the man who stood before it wasn't Kieran. Not anymore. Ishkur wore his body like a robe of war. He moved with elegance too fluid, with grace too cruel. His eyes, one still gold, the other a shattered black well, roamed the assembly with the hunger of a god who had tasted mortality and liked the texture of its skin. At his side lay two dead men, council dissenters who had refused to kneel. One had his throat torn, the other only his crown remained. Ishkur held it now in bloodied hands, and with Kieran's voice he spoke. I claim the name of the Ravemarch line. He raised the crown. I sever its chain to mortals. He set it atop his own head, letting blood drip down his brow. And I proclaim the end of inheritance. Gasps echoed like thunder. Swords were half drawn. Orders were half spoken. But no one moved, because every person in that room could feel it, the madness beneath the skin, the wolf with no leash, the alpha with no pack. Then, the side doors opened, and Iskil walked in. He was not dressed for ceremony. No white robe, no collar, no bindings, only his bare throat, a half-healed wound running across it like a second mouth, and his hands, held empty at his sides. Ishkur turned, smiled. Knew you'd come. Iskil didn't bow, didn't blink. He walked until he reached the lowest steps of the dais and dropped to his knees. The whole chamber stiffened. But Iskil wasn't praying. He was pleading. If any part of him remains, he whispered. Bite me. A hush fell so heavy it choked the firelight. Ishkur tilted his head. Kneeling again, are we? His voice was velvet on a blade. Wasn't this what you refused? Wasn't this what you broke him over? Iskil closed his eyes. His voice shook, but not with fear. With memory. I didn't kneel for his crown. I knelt for his pain. Ishkur descended the steps, step by step, each one slower than the last. You think a bite will bring him back? He asked. You think the teeth of a god still remember the taste of regret? He reached the final step and stopped before Iskil. You're not his mate, he said softly. You're my cage. He extended a hand and touched Iskil's jaw. Iskil flinched, but did not pull away. Ishkur leaned down, lips nearly brushing his ear. You were built to hold alpha madness, he murmured. To soften the beast. You're not a lover. You're a keyhole. He pressed his thumb under Iskil's chin and lifted his face. And now that I've taken the beast, he whispered. You don't belong to him. He smiled. You belong to me. The echo of that claim roared through the theater like a verdict. Iskil stared at him, and for a moment his lips trembled. Not with fear, with faith. Then let me die for him, he said. Right now. Here. Ishkur's smile faltered. Iskil lifted his chin. No keyhole bleeds for a lock, he said. But I will. Silence. Ishkur's hand trembled. Because somewhere, deep beneath the scream of his stolen blood, something clawed at the walls. Kieran, still breathing, still fighting. Iskil rose slowly to his feet. The blood at his throat pulsed. He looked up, meeting the eyes of the half-god in front of him. If I marked you now, he whispered. If I finished what he couldn't, he stepped forward. One bite. Ishkur didn't move. Iskil's voice cracked like glass. Would I bring him back? And that was when the gold eye blinked. Just once. And the black one flickered. Ishkur staggered. Then snarled, voice layered with fury and desperation. You try, and you die. Iskil didn't step back. Then maybe I was meant to. Above them, the ceremonial fires began to shudder, and the sky outside wept silver. Far beyond the palace walls, in the ruins of the moon-born temple, an old priest looked up, and said the words none dared to repeat. The mate will fall. Chapter 27 The Omega Who Chose the Fire. The temple was already burning. Cracks laced the dome of the Munrend altar. The ancient roof split open like a broken skull. Light bled down from the twin moons overhead, one silver, one blackened. The wind screamed through shattered archways where hymns had once been sung. Ishkur stood at the altar's heart, in Kiran's body, crowned, barefoot, breathing slowly as if he had all the time in the world. And behind him, Sereth lay unmoving, half buried beneath fallen stone. His armor cracked, eyes barely open. At the foot of the stairs, Mavira's body bled out across the sanctified steps. Her neck opened in a perfect curve. She hadn't even been allowed last words. And still, Ishkur's mouth was curved in a smirk. Kneel, Iskil, he said, before this moment ends. But Iskil did not kneel. He was already walking, not slowly, not hesitantly. He wore no robes, only blood, and beneath his skin, the final fragment of the mark still burned. The unfinished soul brand he'd carved between them when he bled into Kiran's mouth. He had fed it nothing since. Until now. Ishkur turned. Kiran's body gleamed with sweat, breath shallow, alive, but drowning in something deeper than sleep. Ishkur licked his lips with Kiran's tongue. You're too late, he murmured. He's almost gone. Iskil stepped onto the altar. One foot, then another. I'm not here to save him, he said. Ishkur raised an eyebrow. No, I'm here to die with him. Ishkur faltered just briefly. Then Iskil was there, before him, close enough to feel the breath leaving Kiran's lungs, close enough to taste the memory of every command, every plea, every time he was pushed away just to be pulled back again. He reached up. Ishkur snarled. You try to mark him now, and you... But Iskil wasn't aiming for his neck. He pressed his mouth to Kiran's chest, over the faded blood mirror scar, and kissed it, soft, lingering, and let the final ember of the mark release from his soul. The echo surged, a thread of silver fire leaping between their bodies, not just flesh to flesh, but spirit to spirit. It did not burn like a blaze. It sang like a scream. Kiran's spine arched. Ishkur roared, not in dominance, but in pain. The fire rejected him. Kiran's body convulsed. His mouth opened. His eyes opened. Gold. Both of them. Iskil. The voice was ragged. Real. He was back. Only for a moment. But real. I never wanted you to die, he whispered, voice breaking. Iskil smiled. Even as fire curled at the edges of his veins. Even as blood trickled from his ear, his mouth, the corner of his eye. I know, he said, which is why I had to. And then, he kissed him, fully, one last time. And with that kiss, the soul brand ignited. The mark completed. And the body of Kiran Ravemarch was no longer just his. He was theirs. Ishkur screamed from inside. The god shade raged, tearing through the fractured imprint, but found nothing left to corrupt. Iskil had filled every wound with himself, every hollow space with his own fire. There was no room left for the monster. Kiran collapsed forward, arms wrapping around Iskil instinctively. Not as an alpha, not as a wolf, but as a man. I can't hold it, he choked out. Iskil, limp in his grasp, pressed a final breath against his throat. You don't have to. And then, his body fell still. Outside, the moon split, and the sky turned red. On the broken altar, Kieran looked down at the body in his arms. The blood still warm, the soul already fading. You didn't mark me, he whispered. Tears slid down his cheeks. You were killing me. And somewhere deep inside, Ashkur laughed. Only once. But this time, it sounded afraid. Chapter 28, The Final Mark. The silver-bone throne stood under a fractured sky. Its spires bled silver light, ancient bones molded into arcs that once hummed with the laws of kingship, loyalty, and blood. But tonight that light bent, pulsed, and from the wound in the sky, the eclipse rift, shadow and flame began to pour. And then it stepped through. Ashkur, no longer just a whisper, no longer hidden in the skin of another. He came in his full form, a wolf of white flame and bone, crowned with curling antler horns of silver ash. His wings, rib bone forged and blade edged, spanned wider than the spires of Valenhall. And his voice, it was not a voice. It was the sound of the world tearing in half. Mine! The word shook the stones. Priests screamed and dropped to their knees. The elite guard raised spears, but the moment they breathed near him, they combusted. Ashkur stood atop the throne dais, muzzle dripping molten ruin, eyes blacker than anything that had ever existed. Bring me the soul that marked me. And from the far end of the broken marble court, Kieran stumbled into view, barefoot, bleeding, half his body blackened by corruption. His right arm no longer flesh but silvered bone bound in rune scars. One eye glowed gold, the other was nothing but smoke. But his arms held Iskiel, limp, unbreathing, yet still warm. Still, Kieran fell to one knee, then rose again. He wasn't fighting for breath. He was fighting to stay himself. Ashkur turned toward him. Give me the vessel, the god wolf growled. But Kieran clutched Iskiel tighter, and refused. Ashkur howled. The sound cracked the palace ceiling. The moon split. The ground tore. Kieran's knees buckled, but he didn't let go. I told you, he whispered to the body in his arms. I told you I'd never let you die alone. Then, a flicker of breath, a soft intake. Iskiel's lips parted, and in a voice like ash over fire, he whispered, I'm still here. Kieran's heart nearly stopped. Iskiel. But Iskiel was already lifting his hand, weak, shaking, and pressing it to the side of Kieran's neck. There was no strength in his fingers, but his mouth moved. His lips touched the hollow where Kieran's pulse lived, and he bit. The fire that surged through Kieran wasn't pain. It was recognition. It wasn't dominance. It was devotion, not a mark given in power, but one received in surrender. Omega to Alpha, soul to soul. The old system shattered with that bite, and Kieran became. His back arched. The flames in his bones roared. The silver and black across his skin merged, his body cracking open like armor too long worn. From his chest erupted light. Not Ashkur's, not the gods. Theirs. He set Iskiel down gently. His form shifted. His bones howled. He dropped to all fours as the final transformation took him. Wolf form. Not Ashkur's mimicry of majesty, but real. Flesh, flame, fury, silver black, shot through with white from Iskiel's final kiss. He bared his fangs. Ashkur roared and launched. They met mid-air, claws against claws, flame against resonance. Ashkur shrieked as Kieran's teeth clamped on his shoulder, tearing through god flesh. Kieran howled in return as Ashkur's tail blade lashed across his flank, tearing runes into his ribs. They slammed into the eclipse rift, shattering light. Then down, then through. The world quaked. Every structure carved from the old system, the throne, the tower, the temple, collapsed in on itself. And amid the chaos, Iskiel opened his eyes. just once. Enough to see the sky become fire. Above, in the rift, Ishkur had begun to falter. His wings beat slower. His jaws lost force. Because every time he struck, Kiran didn't just take the pain. He broke through it. Every memory, every scar, every humiliation and ache that Ishkur had wrapped around Kiran's soul was burning away, because Kiran had been claimed, and not by the gods, but by the boy who had never once knelt, not for power, not for love, only for choice. Ishkur screamed. Kiran lunged. Their bodies collided in one final crash of soul and blood. The moons shattered, and Kiran's voice cut through everything. I don't belong to you. I am. Ishkur surged forward, and the world exploded into white. Chapter 29, The Ashes We Chose. It was not a god who ended the war. It was not a king. It was not even a wolf. It was fire. It was choice. And when it passed, it left no victors, only silence. Sarath had seen battlefields before. He had ridden through the blood-soaked trenches of the hollow fens, had watched the dying moons reflect off corpses too mutilated to bury with names. But nothing, had prepared him for the stillness of Valenhall's ruin. The throne was gone, the palace sundered. The gods' theater lay in collapse, its marble teeth gnawed into the belly of the mountain. And where the eclipse rift had cracked the sky, only a gash of silver ash remained, hovering like an unhealed wound above the crater. At its center, embedded like a relic, a single piece of silver-black armor, too large for a man, too fragile for a god. It bled, not red, but gold. The wolves would call it the fall of the Alpha Crown, the end of the blood system, the breaking of the lunar lineage. But none of them had been there. None of them had carried him from the ash. Saratha's arms barely held together as he bent beside the shattered dais, his fingers closing around Iskil's body, light as breath, still warm. But he did not wake. No flicker in the throat, no stir in the ribcage, only a mark, new white, curling around his neck like a vine of frost. And in its center, Kiran's name, not etched, not burned, but grown from skin, like a truth never spoken aloud until it bloomed. They buried him beneath the silvermoon tree, where the roots curved toward the old wells and the blossoms bloomed once every 20 years. Sarath laid him down himself. No guards, no priests, only a silence filled with too much that could not be undone. The crowd gathered, Omega and Alpha side by side. No collars, no chains, no scent bonds forced into place. Because something had shifted. Some invisible yoke had snapped. The imprint system, centuries old, older than even the records dared write, had gone quiet. Those who still bore marks awoke with them faded. Some vanished, some turned to scars, and some, those carved with cruelty, burned to ash. None knew why, until they looked at the neck of the boy beneath the tree. The first and only Omega who had marked back. Not to claim, but to choose. The priests whispered about it later. How the rift closed the moment his blood soaked Kiran's throat. How no god answered when the council summoned the sacred flames. How no Alpha could force a kneel anymore. And how every Omega born after that day was born without the gland. It was not magic. It was the cost of fire. Sarath stood watch that night. The ashes of the palace still drifted down, settling in his hair, lining his armor. He didn't brush them away. He watched the tree, watched the wind, watched the body that never decayed. They said some imprints don't burn when the soul leaves. They remain until their twin soul finds peace. But the second half of the mark on Iskil's throat never appeared, because the other half was lost, burned in light, or devoured by darkness. No one could say for certain, but a child came, late in the night. He couldn't have been more than 7 winters. Wild black hair, big eyes, feet dusty. He approached the tree, barefoot, No parents called after him. No guards stopped him. He dropped to his knees and touched the ground and said nothing until the wind moved the blossoms. And somewhere in the hush between breath and memory, the boy looked up, as if hearing something, as if listening, and a voice that had no mouth, no shape, no claim, whispered low, "He burned for you." The boy's eyes widened, the wind stilled, and in the stillness, something else bloomed. A mark, not on the skin, but in the air, silver, shaped like a ring, and etched in the language no one remembered anymore. The words read, "Love has no alpha, only fire." Chapter 30, Until the Howl Comes Home. The silver moon tree still bloomed once every 20 years. No one remembered who planted it. No one could explain why it never withered, or why the roots refused to grow beyond the hill where the ruined palace had once stood like a spine against the sky. But those who came to kneel beneath it swore they heard a voice when the wind was right. Not a god, not a king, just a sound, low, familiar, like something once lost. Remembering how to call home, Kieran never returned. Not as Alpha, not as man, not even as Ash. His armor had rusted into the stone at the foot of the throne. His name had faded from the council's record. His bloodline dissolved with the old imprint system. Some claimed he was dead. Others whispered he'd become the wolf who lived beyond the veil, half memory, half myth, howling only when the moons aligned. Sereth didn't care. He knew, because every night, when he stood beneath the silver moon tree, he felt it, a pressure just behind the ribs, a breath that wasn't quite air, a memory that wasn't quite his. And in his sleep, Kieran dreamed. He dreamed of the white that lived between fire and frost, of echoes that had never left him, of the scent of ash in the wind and silver in another's skin. He dreamed of a name spoken softly enough to break a curse. Tonight, the dream was different. Tonight, the old stones of the imprint hall stood unbroken. Tonight, the great mirror did not show what you feared, but what you longed for. And Kieran stood barefoot beneath it. No crown on his brow, no madness in his breath. His eyes were both gold, rimmed in light. The chamber was empty until it wasn't, a shimmer of radiance. Then footsteps gentle as dusk. And Iskiel stepped through, not bleeding, not kneeling, no collar, no mark, just himself. His spine straight, his gaze calm, his voice absent because there was nothing more to say. Kieran moved first, a step, then another. They met at the center. No trembling, no question. Kieran raised his hand. Iskiel raised his. And when their fingers touched, the mark bloomed, not in pain, not in hunger, but in silence. A small crescent, white as bone, warm as breath, formed over their linked hands. It didn't claim. It didn't bind. It simply said, "We were." And that was enough. The dream never lasted long. It never had to, because somewhere, beyond memory and mourning, beyond duty and death, they still touched, if only at the edge of sleep, if only in the space where wolves do not howl. But wait, and wait, and wait. He was the Omega who held the Alpha's curse, and the Alpha who chose to carry it, until the howl came home.